Margaret Mwachanya, who exited and left the commission not fully constituted with only 3 commissioners. Of course, 36 applicants will be facing the select panel that will be led by Elizabeth Muli and also be assisted by James Achoka as the commission or the select panel vice chair. Over 600 Kenyans had applied for the positions, and of course 4 positions and over 600 applicants. We are expecting something quite extraordinary before the general polls, and as soon as it is constituted, of course it has had a lot of challenges and also a lot of court cases in court. Remember, even the Court of Appeal, IEBC, was being represented by the former AG. Of course, a lot has dented the IEBC, if you ask me, and more so it's after the nullification of the 2017 general polls, after the Supreme Court declared them null and void, and we had to go back to the ballot box. Of course, IEBC also has come out strongly to defend itself from a lot of allegations, and we will be looking at some of those, including the selection and what is expected of those 36 candidates. And joining me in stage or here on set is Gitonga Mukunji, who is a governance expert and also a political strategist. Karibu sana Bwana Gitonga.
Asante sana.
And perhaps to give us a feel, what do we expect today at the IEBC selection panel begins its work today?
Well, thank you so much for having me, first and foremost. Also, I appreciate so much the fact that we have a new KBC with a new look, and I'm very happy to be part of this. Talking of the IEBC and the process that is starting today,
yes,
I would first say I wish all the candidates luck. And it's a process that I feel it's a little bit behind time, because as we all know, elections is a process. Electoral process, and for now we should have done many things with a complete IEBC, which includes boundary review and all. But well, here is where we are, and we are hoping to get commissioners, the 4 commissioners who will come and complete the commission as is supposed to be and as stipulated in the Constitution. We also expect the new team, if I may call it that, to be a team that will have one direction. We don't want to see the problems we have seen before in the past, where commissioners have decided to just go their own ways and make their own conclusions and bring their own update. We have seen the same happening in 2017. Where even some resigned before election was fully complete.
Yes. And
where we are right now, we are hoping to get the best candidates. Now, IEBC is an institution that has a lot of interests. Many people would like to get agreement, control it.
Exactly, and also Kenyans we are watching. And
Kenyans are watching.
Yes.
We need to have that, we need to get that public trust for IEBC. And it's a do or die process, because election year, as we all know in Kenya and where we have been in the past, it's an election year that we can go into war. We can have tribes fighting against each other. So I'm hoping the panel to be very keen on issues of interest to the public, and among them is actually the integrity part,
yes,
of the commissioners, and also the issue of having a commission that is zero I mean it is bipartisan, to all parties.
Okay.
Yes.
At least we have a feel of what to expect, and of course Kenyans actually waiting anxiously to see how these interviews are conducted. But before we go on with this live discussion, as I said earlier, today is the 7th, that is Saba Saba, and we are commemorating 31 years since the Kenya Saba Saba protest. You do remember, led by, among others, Kinajindo Matiba and others. Saba Saba is renowned as the day that those protests took place and even people lost their lives. Well, they are commemorating the day at Chester House right here in the county of Nairobi. Let's first of all listen in. As we wait for that live feed, it will be remembered that Kenyans from all walks of life on this day, 1990, is really were demanding for their basic right, and the clamor to change the constitution, which culminated looking at 1990 and when we promulgated our constitution. Actually, it's been a long journey. We do remember a lot of Kenyans had to sacrifice a lot, including their lives for that purpose. And today also is also an instrumental day regarding the Saba Saba. You do remember we're talking about IEBC, which will culminate into elections, MCAs, even the president himself. And you do remember there is a petition that was taken to court or filed in court seeking to have MCAs and MPs requirement to have degrees actually quashed. And of course there is also a bill pending at the Senate by Kipchumba Murkomen, and of course today is when that case is being heard. As we wait for that live feed, 600 applicants, 36 shortlisted candidates. It shows a lot of people want this job, and it's a very it's a hot seat job, if you ask me.
It's a job. I hope whoever applies has what it takes. And I mean, it should be an open process, because I'm also curious on how they arrived on 36 candidates out of 600. But we are hoping to at least be able to finalize the process within no time. If we look at the work of the commissioners, I mean, the commissioners will determine whether this country will go will go down the drains in 2022, or it will stand strong. And the commissioner's integrity will determine the integrity of the election of 2022. It's actually hand in hand. And if we look at it, we don't want where we have cases coming up of preparedness of IEBC in the election. As I've said, and you remember in 2017, the first election was nullified, not because the outcome was disputed, but because of the process. And I have said before that we are already late when it comes to the process. So it is not a wonder to get 2022 cases coming up and telling us the process was not right. The boundary reviews were not done. So we want commissioners that will be able to look at law, the legal framework, ensure they understand it, and they are able to actually integrate it into the manner that there are no cases that will come up later. We want commissioners that will ensure they at least give us qualified candidates. And this is where actually Kenyans should be very keen that qualifications to vie in Kenya are supposed to be followed to the latter.
Okay, before then, let me just interject. Let's first of all cross over to the Saba Saba commemoration. And of course, when we come back, we look at the confidence that Kenyans have, and of course, the dented image of IEBC from the general elections 2013 or challenged 2017. We also have BBI has also been challenged in court. But first of all, let's listen in.
Calls for the women doing small businesses, for all women who are in this country. Because as we speak of change and revolution, we cannot take away the gender equation, and we cannot take away women from this equation, because the women folk make 50%, if not more, of the population. And we cannot have change, and we cannot have a revolution if there is no liberation of all the women. And as the women, we ask for liberation, we ask for reawakening, we ask for change. Kitu kubwa sana ambacho kinatuathiri kama wanawake ni taasubi ya kiume ambayo tunaita patriarchy, lakini pia sana sana issue ya class ambapo tuko na grassroots women who have absolutely nothing, and we have other people who have accumulated so much wealth and they live in so much abundance. So I stand here today to represent the women folk of this country and to ask for a liberation, that we will march until all women are free. And to live, we resist. To transform, we march. And we ask for economic empowerment of all women and employment opportunities to these women, so that we are not slaves to marriage, we are not slaves to our men, but that we can move forth with our dreams as women as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sefusani. Unajua mwanamume akianza kukubandika majina, I know that's patriarchy, so you shall resist. I'd like to invite my comrade, the Vice Chair of the Communist Party, Buka Ngesa, to speak, and then after that we're happy to take your questions. Thank you very much, Comrade Buka. Asante.
Forward with the resistance, forward.
Forward.
Forward with the resistance, forward.
Forward.
I will have a few remarks as the Vice Chairperson of the Communist Party of Kenya, because today is a historic moment, and it is not a historic moment for the oppressor, but it is an historic moment for the oppressed. Today, as we join hands with our brothers and sisters and sister organization from what we call the left, what Dictator Moi banned in 1980s, today we can stand up as Communist Party of Kenya, and we call ourselves the left political movement because of the sacrifices that people made before us. And for that reason, we want to remind the oppressors today, the dictatorship of the status quo, that the people here are willing.
Some of the members of the civil society under the hashtag Saba Saba March for Our Lives, and they're talking about it's a moment for the oppressed, not the oppressors, and they have actually endeavored, and they have said that they will march from Nairobi CBD to Parliament to hand them a petition seeking or demanding to have the 2010 Constitution fully implemented. Of course, we also have clamor for that, for the change of the Constitution, but they will be doing that to petition Parliament to fully implement the 2010 Constitution. Perhaps, Gitonga, you can chip in on that. They're talking about we want the 2010 Constitution fully implemented from when it was promulgated and when we started using it. Till now, over 22 attempts to amend it, including the BBI, the Punguza Mizigo, Okoa. There have been several. Now they're talking about, leave alone whatever you want to change. What we want is the 2010 Constitution to be fully implemented. And we both agree, and Kenyans agree that, of course, we have some loose nets and loose nuts we need to tighten. We need to let some things go. We need to bring in some things. Kindly.
The civil society, as you've said, they are very right. I mean, we need to implement this constitution. The world has termed it as the most progressive constitution. And I feel that, and why you can see all the attempts to actually amend it failing, is because it's a very strong constitution. We still haven't gotten the 2/3 gender that is stipulated in the Constitution. There are other things that have not been able to get to perfection yet. And we are still thinking about amending it. I think I agree with the civil society. We need to implement the Constitution 2010. We need to follow it to the letter. We need to empower the institutions that are stipulated in that Constitution. And this country will be a different country if we do that. The regime that we have had, the Jubilee regime, has come with the idea of changing the Constitution the very last hour of it, the last year. I would call it the last leg. And from my side of view, I think the BBI has failed. And if there is anything that is going to happen in terms of changing or going to a referendum, it can only happen during the election itself of 2022. So some proposals that have been made in the change of the Constitution are very good. I mean, we have issues with the wage bill and the cost on the Mwananchi Wanjiko in terms of whatever offices have been put in place. We have issues of ensuring that some parts, especially parts that bring Kenya together, are fully more pronounced. But I feel if the Constitution is implemented and we have a regime that wants to empower that Constitution, then we are going to have a very strong country. So I fully agree with them. If I wasn't here, I would have joined them.
Really? Indeed, of course, 31 years down the line, we still remember this day. And of course, we have even the Saba Saba grounds just for that, because of course the Constitution, the clamor for change of Constitution began back way back back in the days, and we are proud to have one of the most progressive Constitution, as you have just said. And perhaps back to the IEBC, we will be getting back to the civil societies and their march and the clamor and what will happen in Parliament after they give their petition seeking to have the 2010 Constitution fully implemented, leave alone the clamor for change, but they want the full implementation of the Constitution, perhaps to enjoy the full fruits of the Constitution. Back to the interviews, of course, which will be carried out live, so that all Kenyans can see and have some confidence. And talking about confidence, how do we instill confidence in the exercise and IEBC? If we look at the electoral process since way back, we had the Electoral Commission of Kenya, ECK. We had the Interim Independent Electoral Commission, IEC. Now we have ECK. ECK. So we have had issues since way back, and they can only be compounded by now looking at it now that we need more commissioners, just slightly over a year to general polls. And it was really dented by the 2017 nullification of the general polls. How do we instill confidence in the IEBC or the electoral process in Kenya?
Well, that's a very good question. And I'm one of the most observant when it comes to this issue of elections, because when it happened that there was post-election violence in Kenya, I was among the people that was affected, because we had to wait. We were in the university, we were told to go home, and we waited for quite a while before everything came back to normalcy. When it comes to the public trust of IEBC, and I feel the current commission, although not fully constituted, finds itself in quite a dilemma. As I've said, from my point of view, there are people who want to control the IEBC. And while I was observing by-elections that were being carried out around, you find that in Juja, a certain governor decided to stop the process and went and tried to throw out everybody, telling them this process, we are not trusting it, because he realized his candidate was not going to win. And what happened is the chairman himself had to intervene, Chebukati,
Yes.
And went there, and at the end of the day, everybody knew that election was free and fair. If you look at a place like Matungu and the rest, we saw commissioners being harassed and being thrown around by politicians who believe they are bigger than everybody else. But at the same time, we have an IEBC that requires funding and fair funding so that they can prepare for these things. And we have had issues with that. Right now, the budget that they have been given is not enough even to prepare enough for the election of 2022. And at the same time, there was a lot of questions when, and if you've been listening, when it comes to verification of voters register, there was a question that was asked in the Court of Appeal that they were not able to answer very well. So there's some things they're supposed to do to get that public trust, and there's a need for the executive to support it, the commission fully, so that also the Kenyans can see there's work being done for preparations. And
yes,
before you interrupt me,
yes,
I think that is where the problem is. If the executive can hold, can decide to manipulate the IEBC, then we'll have a problem. If the IEBC fails the integrity tests, like what I've given an example of Juja, then we also have a problem. So it's a very big, it's a very delicate balance, and there's a need for the commission to be out there in public, give statements on the preparedness. Let them tell us what they're going through in case there's a problem when it comes to financing. But let them not do things that will end up in court and make this country suffer problems when it comes to elections of 2022.
Indeed, it's a good thing that you've brought that up. And my question was, how then do you believe that IEBC or the electoral process has full confidence and a full goodwill from the government? Why do I ask this? From the days of Zacchaeus Chesoni,
yes,
to Kivuitu, and now to Chebukati,
yeah,
they literally were weathering the storm. Looking at the boundaries, they have been challenged. Looking at the elections, they have been challenged in 2013, in 2017. Leave alone the MCAs and MPs and the governors challenged. Look at the BBI, it has been challenged. Look at the operation, the quorum of IBC. Do you believe it has enough goodwill from the government? The electoral process.
I have seen some good results when it comes to the by-elections from IEBC, and I have not seen any by-election being challenged in court. So it means that they know what they're supposed to do. It's also interesting that even politicians who are they are very vicious when it comes to criticizing IEBC, when it comes to these by-elections, they keep quiet and they accept the outcomes. Some margins are very, very small, just like we have had in many elections. But I keenly understand that the election, the general election, is not like the by-elections. But if you look at what they have done in the by-elections, it shows that there is a will and there is goodwill to do a credible election and deliver to Kenyans. But the government, which should be held accountable through the civil service, opposition leaders, and anyone who is interested in politics of this country, we should ensure that the government, we pin down the government to fully finance, fully cooperate, and ensure that we have an IEBC that is fully functional. And it starts with the commissioners. Whatever is going on in the in the KICC today, from today, is a thing that will attract a lot of public viewing. Just like we had with the judges. And I would say that let them show us that they have gotten the right candidates, and there is no recommendations which I would say chini ya maji to ensure that some people are put there to serve other people's interests. So that's where it starts. And it is not too late. but it's still not too early. It is too late, I would say, actually, but it's not like fully gone. So we can still have an IEBC that is fully functional and has gained public trust by the time we get to the general election of 2022.
Indeed. And let's look at the powers of IEBC. Of course, there are a lot of people who have talked about IEBC, including the chairman himself, should be given more mandate.
Yes.
Looking at handling elections. Then we talk about, of course, prosecuting those involved in election malpractices.
Thank you.
They be given more teeth. Would you support a much stronger and endowed IEBC than the one we have now? Because we are constituting a full commission now.
Well, that's a very good question, because I have just mentioned the issue that happened in Juja with everybody watching.
Yes.
And I think for the part of public trust, what should have happened is that person should have held into account. Everybody saw, it was clear in everybody's eyes that somebody was trying to sabotage the election process. And I think that's where it starts. We feel that there is a de-link between the Interior Ministry that is supposed to offer a lot of cooperation to IEBC with the IEBC itself. There is more that is required. And I want to say that the election of 2022 is a very delicate election. People have actually been saying all these manner of things. And some have said we might even end up in a very problematic year afterwards. So it is very important that people should hold this part of preparation very seriously. And I would put it to President. I mean, the President has always said that he wants to leave a united Kenya. You want to leave a Kenya that when elections are going on, people vote and wait while they are eating chapati. That has been his saying. It is him to show us he means what he says by ensuring that the IEBC is fully given cooperation. And whatever happens with the BBI, let us see preparation of 2022 elections in top gear. We might lose a lot in terms of an economy if we don't do that.
Indeed, of course, the economy is always polarized when we are headed to the polls.
Absolutely.
And looking at what you've just talked about, the Juja one, and we also had the one at Matungu. I remember there were concerns, and of course they were raised in Juja, that the official result should be the one announced by by the station, not the commission. We want it actually, whatever has been announced at the polling station is what runs in the commission. Would you support the same?
I fully agree, because we have had misleading, I mean, you have seen it in Kenya.
Yes, you even have media station. We also do our tallying as well.
Yes.
So they want the final result to be announced at the polling station, not to wait actually for the national tallying center.
Yes, yes.
So something that has brought a lot of
good part of what we made in terms of the new reforms that came in 2013. And I see another issue coming up of systems failing, which I think this is a time to look at those things. We have a very big problem, because some of these things, they have a very thin line when it comes to government control, and the 3G network, the 4G network, those are things that can actually mess an election, and you're unable to prove who won and who lost. If we are able to give election results at the polling station levels,
yes,
then I will tell you that it will be so hard for anybody to steal an election at the tallying center. It will be so hard, because at the polling station level, unless there is unless there is a serious coordination inside IEBC to steal elections, which would be a serious problem by itself, then if at the polling station level is where the results are trickling in, then we will have a very easy election in 2022. And I fully support that. Fully support it.
Yes. Another issue that always creep up when we are having elections is infrastructure.
Yes.
Of course, when we come back after this short break, we can tackle that.
Yeah.
Remember, servers zilifunguliwa, you know, the internet issue, the tablets not working. Do we need more to be done? And of course, perhaps on legislation, we even have lost lives. You do remember we had Musando who was murdered, and of course, all things pointed to matters election. So do we need to change that so that we may not encounter the same problems of servers, of internet? We will be getting back into that. I'm hosting Gitonga Mukunji, but we are looking at the IEBC. We will be right back after this short commercial break. My name is Ben Troy Njue. You're watching KBC.
Check out for a KDIC sticker in your banking hall. KDIC, protecting your deposits.
And our praises unto God. Give praise to Rastafari. And our praises unto God.
When I remember seeing her first, she was standing in the club all alone.
Lonely streets we tread together, singing songs.
She has a good heart, and I never.
Shooter, are you ready?
This week on Zurura, boys and their toys.
Tunaenda out of town.
Get to learn the benefits and beauty of running your own home garden.
That is so cool and clever.
Demystifying fishing as an elitist sport and something anyone can do, including you.
So, shake, move.
Woo! That's all coming right up on Zurura. Find your adventure. Only on KBC.
She has been saying a lot of crazy things today. I think she either smokes or she sniffs.
I did not smoke anything. Did you give me anything to smoke or you?
That I did. I sold my soul for my head. Halfway, what image would you have shown the new beast? A reader with no blaze.
Now you are crossing the thin line between me and you.
Two votes, Mishi. Billy. 2 votes. I only need 2 more days, please. We don't even have a single day. Ukoshwata, you've spoken to those stupid classmates of yours.
Classmates, every Saturday on KBC.
This is where it all began. As the mother of broadcasting in Kenya, you can trust KBC to bring you authentic news and programs to your living room. As KBC, we take pride in our unrivaled heritage as Kenya's trusted national broadcaster. Commanding over 92% digital television signal coverage of our country, 23 radio services that cut across our entire language spectrum, a national, regional and international digital presence backed by the most experienced and top-notch broadcast professionals in the industry.
A very good evening to you.
The new look Kenya Broadcasting Corporation is truly ahead of the pack. Turn to the mother of broadcasting in Kenya for stories that resonate with our identity, our aspirations as a people united in purpose. Real stories of hard work, of passion, of creativity, of big dreams. Stories that cement our nationhood. Stories that bring us together as one. We take pride in our shared heritage and destiny. KBC. Informing, educating, and entertaining Kenyans as one nation. KBC. Kenya's listening. Kenya's watching.
Welcome back. This is News Check and this is KBC. Remember, we are also live on our social media platform, and today we are discussing matters polls, matters election, bearing in mind that the IEBC selection panel will be conducting the interview for 36 candidates, and word has it is that the interviews should have already started, but one candidate has already been disqualified because of irregularities in terms of his paperwork. Of course, we'll be telling you much on that, but those others that were scheduled for the day will continue as well, and we will be getting back to the KICC for that live feed. And just before the break, I was joined by Gitonga Mukunji, who is a political strategist, and now I'm joined by Duncan Okech, who is an advocate of the High Court. Good to see you, Counsel.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Thank you.
We were just trying to put in perspective some of the issues that have been brought about when it comes to IEBC and election matters that have been challenged since the days of ECK. Karibu sana.
Thank you.
Before we took the break, we were talking about the candidates themselves and instilling confidence. Perhaps your take on instilling confidence. 2017 was a major blow for IEBC after the Supreme Court nullified the presidential election. Looking at last week, we had the Court of Appeal. Of course, some of the issues that were challenged at the High Court, IEBC also was a respondent in the same.
Yes.
And quorum has been challenged, boundaries have been challenged. How do we instill confidence in IEBC as we head to the 2022 general polls?
That is actually a germane question as for any country, not only Kenya, which considers itself a democracy, because a democracy, the rule of a democracy is that you must have and you must hold free and fair elections at regular intervals. So that if you do not have confidence in the electoral body, or if the electoral body, putting it in other words, does not instill confidence of the populace, then you cannot properly even call yourself a democracy, because you will not have free and fair elections in terms of the perception of the general masses. So to a large extent, the major issues has been the appointing process, or how do these commissioners find themselves in office. Those are some of the issues that were captured in the Kriegler report. And remember, previously we've never had a consistent way, and that at a point it was politicians, political parties appointing. At a point you find it was a body appointing, and generally the 2010 constitution tried to instill some process to which commissioners can find themselves in office. That is a process that is being observed currently, and it is expected that that process will be as transparent as possible in terms of who sits in that particular commission that will appoint. You find that it is broad-based. It is now not left to only certain sectors. Lawyers are involved, the public is involved, the state is involved, so that even that process itself, before you even arrive at those names, is already a process that still will demand and deserve the respect of Kenyans, so that the outcome of that process would equally be a process that Kenyans will associate with, and those names are names that people will know. You have not landed there pursuant to your political persuasions, pursuant to whichever side of the political divide you lean on, pursuant maybe to your tribe or where you come from, but it will be properly merit-based, juxtaposed with what is required for someone to sit in that commission. And I believe this will actually instill confidence to this IEBC at this particular point, and noting that the term of the chair is also almost coming to an end, so that the engine itself will be rejuvenated from within. And the problems, and I want to believe the problems that we encountered in 2017 will actually be problems that we should not be able to encounter. Remember, at a point we were saying it is only the commissioners who are tasked to deal with this. Later on we were then told that it is the secretariat that is actually in charge in terms of the day-to-day running. There is already an infusion of new blood in the secretariat, so that we do not have the secretariat as was. Now the commission itself, in terms of the commissioners, will not have it as was. The only problem that we find is that if the Kriegler report is anything to go by, the timing in which we are bringing all these number of commissioners is also not a very good timing. Kriegler said we must be almost ready for an election 2.5 years to that particular election. We are actually now trying to come up with a system to bring in these commissioners in their numbers, and these commissioners, remember, must fall into a system which is already ongoing. Remember, elections are not planned within a month, within even 1 year. It starts immediately after the general elections. So that even if they come, I'm a bit apprehensive that they may not infuse the blood, or we may not see those results immediately, based on the fact that they'll join this journey midway, and there's very little they can do to actually change the major policy positions that have already been put in place, because changing that would ultimately affect the general elections in terms of planning. So maybe the results, we'll start seeing them post 2022, that is 2027. Maybe that is when we can say they'll properly fit and we can see those policies, but it is still the saying that better late than never still applies. We'd rather do it now, because we cannot say that just because we are late we don't at least try it.
Indeed, that's one of the questions, of course, the challenge of just 1 year, and of course they have to sift through exactly what the commission has been doing all those years. Perhaps Mukundi, you can chip in there. 1 year, is it exactly enough? We are working with the bare minimum, just as the council has talked about. Kriegler did talk about a minimum of a year, and that is exactly what we are working on. And looking at the confidence that Kenyans have towards the electoral process, do you think the 1 year is exactly enough for these 4 commissioners?
As I had said earlier, Bananjo, is that we are almost late, because when politicians start moving around, and I'm happy that Chebukati, I think it's last month or last week, but he gave a direction in terms of application of some election laws that are already in place. But what I'm seeing is there is a chance that if there is any delay from now, this election could be challenged in terms of the process. And you know very well that in Kenya, when you lose, you go to court, and you get every single thing that you can say that can help either election be repeated or be, they go to your favor. So we are in the line of either getting late or just doing it. And it's a very delicate process. That's why I'm saying we have to have serious cooperation from the executive in terms of funding. We have had issues in the past where actually, as a matter of fact, as my good learned friend has said, these elections should have started immediately after the end of 2017 election. That's when we should have started the boundary review issues. That has not happened. There was no budget for it for the last 2 years, and that is an issue that can be challenged because it's supposed to be done. When it comes to other elections laws like campaign finance bill and the rest, those are things that are supposed to be implemented to the latter.
Indeed.
The integrity of the politicians we are going to get in 2022 is fully dependent on a functioning IEBC. If the IEBC is not going to be fully functional, fully independent, and be able to move its wheels, then we have a problem. And just for the hands up is we are all watching and Kenyans are watching.
Yeah, and Council, before we took a break, we wanted to discuss the challenges, infrastructural challenges that IEBC has had, or the electoral process has had. Looking at 2017, we had the server issues, we had the internet issues. Since the 2013, we had the tablet issues. What more could be done, perhaps? Do we have the goodwill from the national government so that we may not encounter these challenges which always land us in court?
I think one thing we must know is that regardless of, even if we had Jesus Christ as substituting Chebukati in the 2017 or even 2022 elections, you'll still find, like Mr. Gitonga has indicated, someone will still have complaints. And the reason is that it is an accepted norm that elections can never be 100% in terms of compliance, in terms of everything. There must be some anomaly because we are human and man is to err. So it is expected, and that is why even the law says for you to nullify an election, it must be demonstrated that it is so widespread that indeed the interference actually affected the results substantially. So you cannot just go just because one person did not vote and say I'm nullifying those elections, because that person, even if that vote was to be awarded to you, will that change substantially the results? No. So to a large extent, even as we are proceeding, we must anticipate that challenges will always be there. It is human, but that doesn't mean that we do not prepare ourselves to the best of our abilities. Answering your question, already I can see there is an issue of even financing, because Chebukati has actually indicated that they notified the government in terms of the amounts they need to prepare for these elections. In the current budget, which then, if we did not allocate these funds, like from 2017, like Gitonga has indicated, progressively, it means that as of this particular point, we have to then majorly account for that budget that the IEBC wants in this financial year. Unfortunately, what has been allocated to them is a paltry. It's nothing to write home about. So it defeats the purpose, because the next budget cycle will start in June. To that particular, will actually end in June.
Yeah.
To that particular extent, even if you want to allocate money at that point, remember, there are major procurement processes that must be undertaken quite early. And those are contractual, and monies must be paid. These people will not have the money to pay. So it already means that we are at a point where we are already demonstrating that we are not capable to financially support IEBC in terms of its requirement. The moment you do not meet their requirements, it means there'll be a shortfall. That shortfall may actually hit on any other part. It may hit on the delivery itself, it may hit on the systems themselves, it may hit on the human resource which is required. So at any given point, that will ultimately affect the quality of elections at the end of it. So in terms of governmental support, that is the major support that the government ought to have given. At this particular point, Chebukati or IEBC will be left to beg for financial assistance from donors, which is not a very good position, because he who pays the piper calls the tune. So you may also have issues that maybe the way in the US you had that external during Trump and Clinton's elections, you had that there was already that issue that or suspicion that another country actually interfered with the elections. It may as well come to pass that those claims may come into play, because someone is funding you for a reason. So someone may say, how independent will IEBC be if they're even getting their funds from somewhere else? that other person may actually have control, or you do not know what strings are attached. So funding is critical, it is fundamental, it is everything for starters. It supports every other infrastructural aspect. Then coming now to the actual infrastructural aspects, IEBC has already said the softwares they bought, even those gadgets themselves, have already expired. The licenses were long expired, and in any case, we know IT, as I was coming in, you are talking about it. It's something that you need to renew these softwares as technology keeps on advancing. The technology you had yesterday is not the one that will be there today. And it advances to better protect, better ensure that there is security for those systems, and to ensure that it is hack-proof and all those. So that there is requirement to even purchase and to set those processes in place. I note as of this particular point, we have not started that. Remember, prior to the 2017 elections, when the IEBC tried to procure from the funds, I think it was MOFO and others, ODM went to court and actually challenged even that procurement process, because it is everything. So that if this system itself, even in the procurement process and everything, you do not have faith in it, it can still be challenged in court. It can even affect the preparedness of IEBC. Looking at it, IEBC must also be prepared in terms of the constituencies and the boundaries which we have. Like the Constitution says, we must have these boundaries in place, not less than 1 year to the next general elections. That will be 2 weeks in August. So we are almost there. Obviously, it is impractical, but looking at it, assuming BBI was to go through, or the Court of Appeal was to give a go-ahead, and that happens, and it actually gets the support of the people, assuming, it will then culminate to a new dispensation whereby new constituencies may actually be in place by the time we are doing our elections. If that happens, what does that portend to IEBC and its planning and everything, and the infrastructural processes, and
the funding, of course, and the finances as well?
Everything, because they have
70
to plan.
constituencies is a big number.
It's a big number. And you remember there are wards also there, therein, which must also be catered for now under this, and it must also be in the system, the voting system. Even their registers and everything must now be dealt with. So those are some of the major hiccups or major challenges that may face them infrastructurally, which people may not be looking at. That will lead to a lot of complaints. That will lead to a lot of election petitions, which are costly. That will lead to a lot of animosity. And the boundaries themselves, remember, boundary review is never an easy thing. It may also cause animosity amongst communities. It will be challenged in court as well. And it will still obviously end up in court, which is not a bad thing for us, because it creates work for lawyers. So we are not complaining so much. But it is those are major things that as a country we have to look at.
Of course, and perhaps to shift focus on the finance aspect. I do remember in 2017 the IEBC had capped the spending at 15 billion and 5.2 billion for the presidential campaigns. But looking at our country, during elections, people spend a colossal amount of money. Will this actually, the 5 years, 2 million fine, deter politicians from spending as much money as they spend in 2022 succession politics? Mukunji.
Okay, I think the issue of campaign financing is an issue that is supposed to be fully implemented by the IEBC, because we have had issues before where instead of people selling their agendas, they're using monies to get votes, and they're buying votes. As a matter of fact, that is illegal in terms of elections, and that's a law that has not been well implemented in the past, and I don't see it being implemented better this time. I'm very pessimistic when it comes to that, because politicians have gotten their ways around the use of money.
Yes.
I think normally in these Western countries, you find the finance of every campaign are actually given an update every month. You have to declare how much you have used, and on these issues and these ones, because that is where the biggest corruption is. We have had government in the past using public money to do campaigns, and the IEBC can do nothing because those are cases. They have to be put in perspective. My good friends here have to be called and put a case, and it is very hard to prove. But well, what I can say is that when it comes to IEBC as is constituted today, I think we are just hoping for it to do the bare minimum and deliver an election that will not plunge us into chaos in 2022. Whereas we would like to have that perfect election, but the time constraint, money constraint is a problem that is going to come up. So I don't see the bill, that bill being fully implemented in this coming election.
Council, perhaps you can chip in on that in terms of the money that is spent. Of course, the 5 million or the 2 million or 5 years fine. 2 million during election is quite not a very big amount if you have been capped at spending 5 billion or 15 billion, and we know very well that politicians are really rich.
Indeed, that particular law can be a deterrent if you do not look at it from the aspect of only the 2 million, because there is now a custodial sentence which can also be implemented. But the way we know our country, majorly, and if it is politicians, especially someone who has won, you do not want to tell me that you can actually be sentenced. There are people in this country you can never sentence if you want to remain as a country. So reality, these judges also live in this world. So that's why even Parliament in its wisdom decided to have that as an entity, because if I can spend more than 5 billion, 2 million is actually pocket change. I may not even notice it. So, but the principle behind it may also not be justified, because all they ought to say is that if I decide to spend 5 billion, let me be able to justify the source of that 5 million. So that if I decide to sell all my property and I'm foolish enough to do that, or to take that risk, whether or not I win or I don't lose, if it is my loss, it is my decision. You must also be allowed the freedom to make a wrong choice, as long as it is not affecting another person. So we cannot legislate even on everything. We always say you cannot legislate on everything. So long as I can demonstrate that these funds, either I got it from a fundraiser, and you can actually cap fundraising for political purposes, because fundraising, in terms of how our forefathers invented it, in terms of the spirit of Harambee, was to help a community in terms of someone who is sick, someone who is going for education, building a church, but not for myself aggrandizement in terms of I want to eat or I want to be in a certain political post. So that if it is to that extent, we already have a capping in terms of that, in terms of contribution for this. So that is already dealt with by law. But in terms of spending my own money, if I decide I want to spend, let me be able to account for all that money, so that we cannot limit it. And I've seen people electing people who don't have a lot of resources and leaving people who have a lot of resources. And that's why the saying of kula kwa huyu, kura kwa huyu came about, because it is about you using your sense, using your brain while you are actually voting. I saw the youngest member of parliament from the sides of Meru, who didn't have anything, but because people knew what he stood for, what he could do, they actually voted for him against many people who actually had money. So we must come from a point where we can say that you can actually be voted for, not because of the money that you have or you are willing to spend, but because of what you have promised, the agenda that you have. In the US, Obama was not if anywhere near what we can call rich. He actually didn't even have a job by that time. So, and if you read his book, he had also actually been given a last warning by the wife, Michelle, that if actually you don't make it, you'll have to get a day job. I'll not continue supporting you. But because of that, he actually went out, convinced people put their resources, which were not as huge as what the normal people had in terms of the names which were there. And he went and won in terms of the primaries and actually won in terms of the presidents, the senatorship.
Yes.
Later on, he did the same. Not even by the time he was vying for presidency, it's not like he had a lot of money. But that also tells you that with that infusion in our politics, that we will vote for people based on their principles, based on their agenda, it will not matter to us who brings what and he brings how much. And that is where we should be focusing on, as opposed to now legislating on everything and losing focus on the main issues in terms of the social fabric. It is how you are raised, it's how Gitonga is raised, how I'm raised, that, and how we raise our children. That should matter. Those are the things, that the social fabric, how it is woven, will enable us not to have all laws. Otherwise, tomorrow you'll have a law that you must put on a tie, you must have black shoes when you are wearing a suit like that. You cannot policy everything in terms of legislation, and that's where, as a country, I think we may be going wrong, and that may not ultimately help us, because if we decide, we always say, and Gitonga will tell you, that the people we vote in is a reflection of who we are. So if we decide to vote people because they are bonyenyes, that's the mentality that we have, and you deserve those leaders that you vote for. If you decide to vote like in the Bible, they were told there is Jesus here, and there is there was the robber Barnabas.
Yes.
And it was elections. They decided we want Barnabas.
No, Barnabas, we don't want Jesus. And still on the same, still on the same, I think this is something we can yes, just a minute. We need to cross over to Mombasa, where the acting Commissioner General KRA, David Kinu, is launching a metropolitan network project at Kilindini Harbour. Our reporter June Karisa is following it up. Let's first of all get more information on the same.
And the mandate that we have of revenue mobilization, so that government is adequately funded. These revenues will basically come from multiple sources. Two main sources. First is the domestic taxes that are generated locally through the normal consumption taxes like VAT and the like. The other significant component is the revenues generated from the customs area, and this is basically issues about movement of goods, import of goods within the country, export of goods and the like, facilitating of trade with our neighbors. So when you look at trade facilitation, it has got two elements. Number one, you need to enable the business people to do business in an easy way. Therefore, ICT plays a key role. Then as you do that, then bearing in mind the various tax regimes that we have in the various acts that govern customs, then you need again a system that ensures that traders know which taxes to pay, how to pay them, from the comfort of their offices as they move along, and therefore you are able to generate revenue from that customs angle. I have one of the customs experts, my deputy commissioner, Tonui. Anything to add on how?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Such is your name and your designation.
Yeah, my name is Joseph Tonui. I'm the RC for Southern Region. Yeah, basically, like my commissioner has said, the major taxes at the port of Mombasa at the point of entry are the customs taxes. Because people are importing goods into our country, you see the containers here, they need to be cleared. So we have the custom systems, which it will be a consumer of the system that has been placed. The systems need to be connected so that you are able to launch your entries, you are able to pay taxes, and because the system will be much efficient, there will be less or minimal system town times, and therefore leading to faster clearance and enhancing international trade. So we expect that there will be no much complaints from taxpayers saying that there are delays at the port of Mombasa. It will hasten trade. Secondly, when we have trade moving on very well, It means that there are consumption, people are buying things, the economy is doing well, people are making profits from businesses, and that is where we also collect our taxes. So it moves like that. You know, even the efficiency in terms of the infrastructure of transportation, because all this consignment needs to be moved to destination of consumption. Then we should have good roads to enhance efficiency of delivery times, so that the turnaround time is enhanced, and that's how the volume of business is going to be enhanced, and which is very good for our country. So thank you very much.
Last question. There is. You okay?
So, thank you very much. Hope to see you some time as we go about our businesses. Finally, from us as KRA, we are committed, just as we did in last year, by meeting the revenue targets that the government set for us, so that the government runs efficiently. Again, we are committed as a public body, as public officers, on behalf of our Commissioner General, that even in this year, from our staff, we'll do everything possible to ensure that we facilitate trade, we enable our traders, and also we mobilize the revenues that are required to support the government to do what government does. Asanteni sana.
David Kinu launching the Metropolitan Network project at the Kilindini Harbour, which is aimed at enhancing clearance of cargo. Our reporter Junei Karisa will bring a much comprehensive report in our one and other subsequent bulletin. Back to our conversation. In case you just joined us, this is News Check, and today is a great day in Kenya's democracy, Saba Saba. And talking about democracy, we are also talking about matters polls. Remember, the IEBC interviews are starting today, and we'll be heading back to the KICC for that. But before then, I'm joined by two gentlemen. We have Gitonga Mukunji, who is a political strategist, and Dan Kanokech, who is an advocate of the High Court. And we are also trying to put into perspective some matters, IEBC, some of the challenges, and perhaps what to expect. Kenyans are waiting to see exactly who the four commissioners will be. Big task for the selection panel. And before we crossed over to Mombasa, we're talking about matters money, and perhaps you can tie it, Namukunji, you can tie it with IEBC. A couple of weeks ago, the chairman, Wafula Chebukati, did talk about all political parties, 2 months to the general polls, they must give an outline of their spending in terms of polls. And we do very well know Kenyans, perhaps you can call them developing world's politics, a little are tainted by issues of corruption and money laundering. Are we likely to see something like that? Well, 2 months, is it really enough?
It's not enough, and there's a need to expound on that clearly, because there's a reason why this finance issue is a problem in our politics. And Joy, if we talk about politics and money, and how money has messed up Kenya politics, you'll see the reason why there should be a clear and a very strict implementation of the Finance Act, Election Finance Act, Campaign Act, or I mean. Number one, I want to pick where my good learned friend started, and I want to talk of the issue of election code of conduct. The issue of code of conduct, how you're supposed to behave as a political party, as a politician, when you are going through an election, is very important, because it is tied to integrity. Why we have to know how much money has been used by political parties and politicians is because these are people who are coming to manage our hard-earned money and public money, and they manage it in billions. So if an MP, if somebody who is vying for MP spends 500 million Kenya shillings, and CDF per year is around 120 million, it means that that guy has to return his money. And that is where corruption comes in. So to me, I feel IEBC has a serious role to play here. And it is not about declaring how much money you've used 2 months to elections. It's about every single month, a political party must give and should give its usage of money and its mobilization of funding, so that we can clearly monitor how that money is used. This will help to know there's nobody who has spent 1 trillion to become the president. There are people who want to become the president because they are very rich. There are people who have declared that because they are known to be very rich. And it's important to actually know how the money is used. You cannot separate Kenyan politics with money. I vied for Manyata seat for MP Manyata in 2017.
How much did you spend?
Well, around 13-14 million. Yes. Okay. I don't know the capping. I think the capping is 15 million for an MP.
Yes.
But
just did 13 million, 15 is the cap.
Around 13.
Okay.
And this is mostly in terms of logistics. Moving here and there, you have to hire sound systems, you have to be visible everywhere, and those are things that are supposed to be declared. Any other money that is coming from other quarters, we might actually have what we call state capture. We have had the same in South Africa, where a whole president is fully dependent and he says sir and yes to another entity and another country. So it is important to know how these monies are used. I would call upon the IEBC to be more strict in terms of political party spending and politicians spending, because that can help halfway in terms of making sure we don't have the only thing somebody is selling is I have money, so please give me the seat. We want to hear ideas. We have to change that to put our elections to be directed through policies and agendas of the people.
Indeed. And perhaps Council, you can chip in something that you mentioned. We will be having a lot of small fundraising. Basically, they are fundraising because you're calling your friends, telling them that I'm vying for opposition, kindly assist me. Do we run the risk, the 2 months that IEBC was talking about, do we run a risk of money laundering? Because I could be having 20 million, I get around 5 or 1 million, and then I bring in the 20 million and say this is from friends, relatives, and colleagues.
Very true. Indeed, that is a risk that is inherent in this particular process, and all electioneering processes are inherent to money laundering. Basically, because people say that you are not vying for your own self, but for the good of the populace that you want to represent. So they must associate with yourself, and pooling of resources is something that is there and has always been there and will be there, not only here but even in the developed democracies and republics. However, if it is an avenue whereby now, even with the regulations that we have, that will try to put a capping even on that, it may be very hard to police that in terms of money laundering, because you see, it's like contributions in church. You do not have a record in terms of, we even have of what someone has contributed. The basket will go around. When it comes out there, it may come back with 1 million, with 2 million, with 50,000, with 5 shillings. You do not have a way of accounting that this came from this person and this didn't come from this person. So to that particular extent, the same will happen. But luckily enough is that now you have to declare. So the issue will be, how realistic will we be that that declaration will be a realistic declaration or a truthful declaration? It may be very hard. So they may try. And remember, with the number of, we have a 6-star election process And it is very hard, and with the number of constituencies and wards that we are dealing with, plus the presidential elections, it may be very hard to actually police all this. IEBC will not have the manpower to do so, and to that particular extent, you will find that all these elections are happening at once. Campaigns are happening at once. So to a large extent, it is very, if it was at least staggered, that you are dealing with ward representation first, member of parliament, or together, then you go to gubernatorial and senatorial, then you go to presidential. It may be a bit, there may be some level of success if you try to police. But for now, it will be a tall order, and maybe gradually, even after elections, those are things that maybe can be continued. But remember, if someone has been elected and maybe the state agencies, DCI, come and say there is an element of money laundering, it will still be taken to a large extent as weaponizing this fight. So someone will be saying we are going after Mheshimiwa Gitonga because maybe at that point he's talking is not on the side of the state, or someone is going after Mheshimiwa Gitonga because someone else is using him. So to a large extent, it's something that it is good that is there. Gradually we may polish it, but it may not be, its efficacy may not be even 90%.
Let's now look at the integrity issue. Of course, there have been calls for IEBC to work closely with agencies like NCIC, EACC, the DPP, so that we may be able to vet the candidates who will be running for different positions. And this has not been actualized. Should this be anchored in law? Council?
Indeed, the only way that you can achieve such is if it is anchored in law. Because without anchoring it in law, I can tell you we have the Fair Administration Actions Act, which superimposes itself in all decisions that are made in this country. To a large extent, if NCIC will just come and say we are not approving this particular name for their own reasons, what are the parameters, what are the checks, what are the regulations, what are the standards that they are using? It will then be seen as a favorism, or maybe they are being used to deny someone else to favor Mr. Gitonga or to favor someone else. So to a large extent, there must be a framework, a legal framework within which they can actually work. Remember, even if you are charged in court, that alone does not mean that you are guilty, because the doctrine of presumption of innocence reigns supreme. So that alone should not actually mean that you'd be adjudged guilty. And that's the only reason why, and this was actually tested when the current president and the deputy were actually vying in 2013 for the 2013 elections, and it was taken to the High Court. And the High Court rendered itself, and I think that is settled in Kenya to a large extent, that just because you are facing such allegations, it by itself cannot be an instrument to bar you. So that, and remember, these were crimes at that particular point. The allegations were about crimes against humanity, which are actually higher in the normal parlance than even the normal chicken stealing crimes. So to allow, or someone who spoke and to a large extent maybe it was deemed insightful. In any case, the section about incitement in the penal code was actually declared unconstitutional. So to a large extent, unless we have proper legislation, I can assure you it is very hard to bar politicians through these processes. And that is why politicians who have even had criminal records in the past, or in terms of facing these particular challenges, have actually not found it very difficult to get approvals. Remember, even the former Nairobi governor, at the point where it was indicated that Nairobi was to go for a by-election in terms of gubernatorial, he actually posted that he got approvals after an impeachment by the Senate, but he still got approval. Yes. Remember, even Waititu himself said, I have approvals. So it tells you that indeed, unless we have legislation, and we actually look at the fundamental fabric in our constitution, to a large extent, that once certain milestones have been, or even if you are charged in court, that alone ideally you should try to expedite that and clear your name before you actually position yourself for public office, because of the general public good. Remember, we have said that even suspicion to have actually committed a crime is enough to impeach a governor. The same suspicion that you have committed a crime should be the standard by which a state officer ought to resign, and for purposes of ensuring that the process to clear that name proceeds, and after clearing the name they can actually bounce back. The same is actually true, because we always say they must be impeccable. They must be like Caesar's wife, beyond reproach. So unless we instill it in our laws, I can tell you tomorrow any advocate will go to court, will have such a decision by NIC quashed, EACC quashed, or any other agency quashed, and they'll still find their name in the ballot, and most likely than not, they will win.
Be our leaders.
Lastly, on that issue, remember we had the by-elections in Juja. The DCI tried so much to say they are falsified, their documents, akin to, I think, what you have just told me in terms of the decision made in terms of one of the nominees today, based on the documents that they provided.
Yes.
The same situation abounded in Juja, and even someone was charged in court. But the same person actually came back and actually won those elections.
Yes.
So it tells you, sometimes if you pursue someone too much, it has a way of making you a hero, or sympathy votes can actually stream in and you actually win. So we must balance how that is done, and it must be done within the law, so that there is no favorism at all.
Mukunji, do you support what council is talking about? At least you've tried to be on the ballot at least once, where Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission will check into your accounts, will look into how you've made your money, will look at the NCIC will be there to see whether you've participated in hate speech and other. Would you support that before somebody is cleared by IEBC to contest? And should it be anchored in law?
That should have been the most important thing that IEBC should be able to carry out, my opinion. But as you've said, and as my learned friend has said here, it's not anchored in law. And that brings a lot of problems. There should also be a way of, I mean, those things that are, those people that are known outright to have committed some bad ethical or whatever against the chapter 6 of our constitution, there should be a way of barring them to get into the ballot. If you've been seen shooting somebody, I mean, it would be weird for IEBC to clear you on the integrity test. You fail. If you've been known to have stolen money and the case gone all the way, or stolen land, I think it's fair for IEBC to say no. But now the problem is it's a two-edged sword, whereby the IEBC cannot do much. But I think one of the laws that I expected our 12th Parliament to act on is that one. And they have acted upon issues of these are the funny issues, but they have left our integrity part very far. And it's because among the people who are in that 12th Parliament are also people with suspicious integrity issues. So I just feel that that is an issue that we have to handle as a country. And for now, I feel it's too late to start bringing it in, but something can be done if we empower IEBC to make these decisions. And when it comes to issue of integrity, if we want to solve serious problems in this country, we just need to work on our integrity of our leaders. If we work on that, we will reduce on corruption, we reduce on issues of leaders going rogue, and we reduce on so many other bad things that happen in our country.
Of course, I had asked Mukunji this question, but since you're an advocate of the High Court, perhaps you can also give us your views on this, on IEBC being given more mandate and more biting power. Of course, we know very well, as we have seen even in the recent elections, some violence, some intimidation, you know, and IEBC talking about there's not much we can be able to do because we do not have the biting power. Do you believe that perhaps we could include some legislation to give IEBC more mandate when it comes to holding elections, Council?
That is true. As I answer that, maybe I may just chip in on what Mr. Gitonga has indicated. It's to a large extent, Karl Marx himself told us that laws are actually normally enacted to protect, the big people, the bourgeois, as opposed to the commoner. And laws are made to protect these people as against the commoners. To a large extent, it will be very hard to expect Parliament to make laws that will actually affect them, or for lack of a better word, eat them. You cannot make such laws. So it is very hard for some of these laws to pass through Parliament. And when my colleague makes it to Parliament and I want...
I see him smiling. I don't know. He would shoot it down.
I can tell you there's something that goes there, and those good ideas he has here will either be shot down immediately he says that, or he'll also be among the people who are opposing such once he's there. So there's very little we can do in terms, because they have that policy of protecting themselves. However, looking at the powers of the IEBC, I believe IEBC is actually, even as it is now, has a lot of powers to deal with most of these issues. It is actually in law. It is legislated, and there are powers that are at their disposal. However, you find that they do not, they are reluctant to employ some of these, because the effects of them are far-reaching. Because IEBC can ensure that they can actually ensure that despite you being a candidate, you'll actually not participate in those elections. They have those particular powers pursuant to your conduct during this particular electioneering period. And anyone who breaches, they can even impose very heavy fines upon individuals, upon political parties.
But it's not happening, Council.
And that's why I'm saying the problem is not so much in terms of empowering them through legislation, because it is the problem is for them to have the audacity to actually implement these particular tools. These laws can actually act as a shield, can actually act as a sword. Normally they prefer to use it as a shield and forget that it can act as a sword. So the moment they crack the whip, and remember, in every electioneering period, most of these candidates always call upon IEBC. They take their complaints to IEBC. Even regardless of which side of the political party you are, even the governing regime has many a times taken its complaints there.
Okay, indeed. Thank you so much. Remember, the interviews are currently underway at the KICC. A lot of people are there actually to witness that, including civil society and the clergy. The second candidate, remember, the first candidate had issues with his documentation. So we go to the second candidate live from the KICC.
Faridun Abdullah, welcome. Thank you.
My name is Gideon Solonka, a member of this panel. My name is Reverend Father Joseph Mutie, a member of this panel.
I am Aworia Choka, Vice Chair of the panel.
Good morning, Mr. Rale. My name is Elizabeth Mayo, member of the panel.
So, Dr. Nuno, please feel welcome. This morning, we just want to have a conversation with you to allow us to get to know you better beyond the documents that you submitted to us. In view of that, this is a timed interview, so I will request that you try and keep your answers precise. Please feel free to ask any panelist to clarify any question or any issue that you may not understand. So with that, I'll start us off by asking you to please tell us a little bit about yourself as a person, and also highlight aspects of your career, your experience, that demonstrate your suitability for being a member of the IEBC.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the panel. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members of the panel, for this opportunity. I really do appreciate to get this opportunity to appear before the panel and to argue my case for suitability of this position. My name is Abdul Zak Aralino, as you have it on record. Currently, I'm a senior lecturer at the university in Moi, in the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies. I hail from Garissa County, and I did my basic education in Garissa, where I did my primary education. From then on, I went to high school in Nakuru and secondary school in Nakuru and high school in Embu, and then on to Kenyatta University. I had a brief stint at banking when I joined Kenya Commercial Bank as a management trainee after my graduation in 1990. And I didn't find banking as attractive. I didn't think it was my career call. And I went for further studies and joined environmental studies, a postgraduate program, and then on to PhD in University of Amsterdam in Holland. And upon return, I took up teaching at the university in the School of Environmental Studies in Moi University, because my doctoral scholarship was on the basis of staff development program for the then budding School of Environmental Studies. But soon after I joined I resumed the teaching, I had the opportunity to serve in the Constitution of Kenya Review Commission as a commissioner, and had the privilege to traverse this country in its, in its all corners, and that gave me an exposure that I think I will cherish for the rest of my life, because it gave me the opportunity to see the diversity in this country, both diversity in terms of communities and diversities in terms of natural resources and diversities in terms of levels of development and deprivation in different corners of this country. And thereafter, after the stint of the commission, which ended with the referendum of 2005, I resumed teaching at the university. Until 2009, when I was identified as a suitable person to start a campus in Garissa as the first director, what is today Garissa University. So I was the first director of that campus. But barely a year into my directorship there, heading that institution, I was selected by the National Assembly of the country to serve in an inter-parliamentary initiative within the IGAD regional bloc, known as Inter-Parliamentary Union of IGAD. And I was the director for social and environmental affairs based in Addis Ababa for about 3 years until the contract ended. And I came back again and continued with my teaching. Madam Chair and members, I think what I believe makes me most suitable is the fact that I am extremely familiar with the diversity in this country, having had the opportunity to walk through this country in all its corners. And secondly, my leadership position and my leadership capacity was identified right from my primary school when I was made the school captain in primary school from class 6. And I was the school captain in high school as well when I was in Embu, Kangaroo School Embu, which was then the largest boarding school, mixed boarding school in Kenya. And thereafter, during my service in the commission, I was in the two very important committees. One was a committee of outreach, which was responsible for rolling out information and the mandate of the commission across the country in all the districts and the grassroots, conducting civic education so that people could make their contributions on what they wanted amended or changed in the new constitution. And the other committee was Committee for Resource Mobilization, which gave me a lot of contact with the donor community, particularly the UNDP and other donors, the CIDA and so on, that supported the commission at the time. Most recently, I was selected by the Budget and Appropriation Committee of the National Assembly to be part of a team headed by then Auditor General, the former Auditor General, a 7-member team to conduct social and economic audit of the Constitution of Kenya 2010, with a view to identifying issues that could be policy, that require policy intervention, issues that would require amendment by legislation, and issues that require constitutional amendments. And we put those things very clearly in our final report. And probably some of the things, I'll not be surprised if some of the things that are being advanced by, in terms of changes required by the BBI program, is not borrowed from there. Particularly issues that really touched on enhancing the independence of institutions, and therefore making institutions work for this country, and getting institutions to be the pillars upon which the country's fabric could be held, as opposed to being institutions that can be deprived of finances at some times so that they can play one way or the other. So, Chair, that is basically the summary in a nutshell, my career progression and what I consider to be my suitability for the position.
Thank you, Dr. Nuno. In your CV, you did indeed highlight the key achievements of the CKRC. I think that was indeed an important part of your career. Now, most of these achievements were generally collective within the Commission. There were two that you attributed to yourself as an individual. I'll just mention one. You mentioned that you are a strong voice in favor of marginalized groups, women, and pastoralists. What exactly do you mean by that you are a strong voice? What does that mean in terms of concrete or specific actions that you may have taken?
Thank you, Chair. I think that is an important issue that you've pointed out. During the civic education on the Constitution, after we produced the first draft, I was tasked to conduct civic education from Isiolo all the way to Mandera and back to Ijara, border in Lamu. So basically, this is an area of what was best known as Northern Kenya, where the communities there felt to be peripheral to the national development agenda. They consider themselves to be on the periphery rather than mainstream. And those are people whose voices were required. You recall, Madam Chair, at independence in 1962, a referendum was called to determine the destiny of Northern Kenya, what was then NFD. And the majority of them voted not to be part of the independent Kenya. So this, for me, was an agenda to ensure that these people actually took up and the initiative and considered themselves as part of this country. And one way of doing that was to give them platform for voicing their concerns, for them to say what they felt was not right for them, how they felt they wanted governed, and indeed that did a lot in terms of inclusivity and bring them onto the mainstream of the country. And some of those jittery arguments that we've seen before have since died.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nuno. Finally, from me, are you a registered voter?
Yes, Chair, I'm a registered voter. The last time I knew, I voted in Garissa in 2017.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nuno. I'll now ask Mr. Morris Kimuli to ask you some questions.
Thank you very much once again. Mr. Nuno.
Yes, sir.
You indicate in your CV that from 2006 to date, you are lead consultant from Frontier Consultants Limited. From June 2016 to date, you are also a board director, Competition Authority of Kenya. And from 2015 to date, you are a board member, Refugee Appeal Board, a Government of Kenya agency under the Ministry of Interior and Coordination of National Government. Now, do you consider this to be private or public engagements?
Thank you.
And you're also a lecturer at Moi University.
Yes, that is true. My consultancy firm is a consultancy firm that I founded, but there's a team that is a team of colleagues who are involved, and whoever has a chance undertakes an assignment when they are given. But the two other positions are board membership One of them has since expired, end of June, the Refugee Appeal Board, and is probably maybe renewed or not. But I'm serving my second term in the Competition Authority of Kenya, which deals with the fair trade and making our economy more competitive in terms of investment. So I consider the two board membership as public engagements, which do not deter, which are not full-time positions. They are part-time, quarterly meetings and so on. And the other consultancy is a private engagement.
What about your work as at the university?
My work at the university is a full-time job.
Do you consider it a public engagement?
It is a public engagement.
It is a public engagement.
Yes,
now, if you are successful, do you intend to continue doing these things that you're doing, those public engagements?
Definitely, sir, no. Because the Constitution is very clear that you may not draw two salaries, irrespective of the amounts, from the exchequer at the same time. When, for instance, I was given an appointment at the CKRC, I took leave of absence without pay from the university until after 2006, when the referendum ended.
So that I get you correct, it's your view that if you work for the commission and you continue working as a board member at the competition authority, that will amount to draw into...
It's an outside conflict, yes.
It's a conflict.
Yes.
But now it is not a conflict when you serve in the public sector at the university. You also serve in the public sector at the competition authority. You also serve at the Refugee Appeals Board, and you are drawing allowances. It's not a conflict.
My answer to that would be that board membership, I've been a board member in 2011 as well in Kenya Accreditation Service. Board membership and the university teaching are not mutually exclusive. The reason being, teaching, I don't hold what you call administrative position like a head of department or a dean. Therefore, my responsibility is to go to class and teach and go. And these meetings are quarterly, they're not continuous, and they're not what you call full-time. So to the extent that I do not do an 8-to-5 job at the university, I wouldn't consider this as impediment to my delivery at the university.
But as a member of the commission, you would consider this an impediment?
Because my consideration is the fact that the commission position is a full-time position to the extent that it's an 8-to-5 requirement. Because this is what the amended act says.
And Article 88.3 of the Constitution also says you can't do that.
Sorry?
Article 88.3 of the Constitution also says you can't do that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Now, let me ask you, in your case study, there was a question on dead voters, and I just want us to go
on
dead voters.
Dead,
yes. In your case study, and we looked at your response. Now, do you think, in your estimation, an election can be invalidated because a register was found to have, for example, 1 million dead voters? Does that make an election invalid? The mere fact of having 1 million dead voters on the register.
I would like to seek clarification, Mr. Kimuli. If there is evidence, and if an evidence can be adduced to the fact that this or some of these dead voters actually voted.
So if the dead voters are not shown to have voted, it is not illegal per se to have dead voters in the register?
It is not appropriate to have them. It is illegal to have them in the register.
Is it illegal to have them in the register?
It is.
Dead voters?
In my consideration, it is.
But you understand that because people die every day, there is a chance that every day there is somebody who died yesterday who is in the register. Are you saying that the register becomes invalid every time somebody dies?
Invalidation and being inappropriate are two different things. The number also matters, Mr. Kimuli. If we are talking about 10,000 dead voters in the register who have not voted, who it can be proved have not voted, is different from having 1 million dead registered voters in the register. That actually indicates negligence of duty on the part of the commission in updating the register, because how is it that 1 million voters out of 15 million or 20 million, that is substantial.
Now I get you. Now you said one of the ways of dealing with that problem, which you consider to be grave, is to connect the voter register with the register of persons, that is IDs. You think that is one way of dealing with it?
Yes, sir. I believe if, for instance, to the extent that declaration of death are done, there are still some who will escape, who will not have notified the registrar of persons on the death of a person. But at least majority of Kenyans notify, because they have to take a burial permit, and that permit then forms a record that can connect the registration with the voter. That if those two are connected in terms of technology, I would believe that the problem would be minimized, if not eliminated.
But you realize that while you suggest that one problem of dealing with it, one way of dealing with it is by linking the two, you realize that you cannot vote without your ID, without being registered.
Correct.
So in some way, the two processes are linked to some extent. But registration of persons,
yes,
and the voter registration.
They are registered, but they are not synchronized in terms of eliminating those who exit the world from those registers. That's the only problem.
Now, do you know what technology platform IEBC is using currently?
They're using multiple technologies, so I do not know exactly which one technology that they're using.
You don't know which one they're using?
Yes.
But you know that the Elections Act requires IEBC to continuously develop policies for use of technology?
Yes.
But you don't know which one they're using?
I don't know which one they're
using.
using.
You do not know which one they're using? And do you know which one was used in the last election?
They used something like KIEMS. KIEMS, K-I-E-M-S. That was the technology they used that was criticized heavily.
It was criticized heavily?
Yes.
Now, just a few questions on your role at CKRC.
Yes, sir.
And we'll be done. You say that it was your duty to collect. You moved around the country and you collected views from the members of the public. And your duty was to write a new participatory constitution for the country. That you understood that to be your role?
Yes.
And you did that?
We did that.
You collected the views of the Kenyans?
Yes, we did that.
But you also say in your CV that that constitution was rejected by Kenyans through a referendum because some of the issues that Kenyans wanted addressed were either left out completely or reflected in a way that was not acceptable to the people of Kenya.
Yes.
So in essence, you're saying that you went around the country, interacted with Kenyans, collected their views, wrote a constitution, but it was rejected because some of the issues did not reflect the wishes of the Kenyans. Was that a problem for you? Is that a problem of the Kenyans, or was it a problem of you as members of the commission?
Thank you, sir, for that observation. I think for those of us who remember, because it was quite a bit of, it was a while, after the CKRC collected and wrote the draft was usurped by the executive and taken to somewhere in Kilifi, and you understand, you recall what was called Wako draft was not a draft of the commission. It was a draft manipulated and introduced alien things that actually made Kenyans reject it.
Now, I get you.
Yes.
Do you consider the CKRC to have been an independent commission? Because you say that the work was usurped by the executive and vandalized.
It was quasi-independent, if you ask me. It was only independent up to the time point of producing the draft. There was no clear protection of ensuring that what came out of the commission actually went to the people.
Do you think there is a likelihood that if you become a member of the IEBC, your work could also be usurped by politicians?
Well, I think there's sufficient safeguards in the 2010 Constitution that protects independent commissions and independent offices under Chapter 15. So I really don't see that problem happening unless an individual chooses to go that way.
Now, just one more question, sir. You undertook a a referendum in 2005 after working for 4 years, and that referendum was not successful. In our constitution, we have provisions for a referendum. You understand that?
Yes.
If a question is presented before Kenyans for a referendum, do you understand the threshold for determining whether or not that question has passed?
Yes, I do.
What is the threshold?
It is a majority of the votes cast. If, for instance, more than 50 plus 1 vote yes, because the question will be either yes or no. Ideally, a question should not be vague. It should be clear, and it should give people choices with regard to why they should vote one way or the other. So those who support the referendum, for it to succeed, must be in the majority.
They must be in the majority.
Yes.
You may just need to look at Article 255, sub-Article 2 of the Constitution, to understand better the threshold that is set by law. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kimuli. Dr. F.S. Abdallah, you may ask your questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Abdul Zak.
Yes, sir.
Can I proceed, or you need some breath from
No, I'm good.
Here?
I'm good.
You're
Proceed,
right. Thank
please.
you.
I'm
Thank
good.
you.
Yes.
Right, Dr. Abdul Zak. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
In your case study under C, there was a question like, what action would you prepare to address the challenges arising in this scenario? There are various there. And you stated to develop a clear code of conduct for Commission and the Secretariat and the staff.
Yes, sir.
Right. Now, are you aware that there is already an existing code of conduct in the IEBC Act?
Yes, I do,
Chapter
sir.
4?
Yes, sir.
Schedule 4? So what else, if you are aware of that, which in my opinion the subjects were really covered up: impartiality, independence, members, independence from political or public office, disclosure of collecting, and so on. If you are aware of this, what in your opinion was missed out, and what do you think should be added in there?
Thank you, Dr. I think in my assessment, it is the enforcement of that code of conduct that is either laxed or is not fully enforced. What is lacking would be critical enforcement of that code of conduct to ensure that there are consequences for its violation. On paper, yes, there are consequences now, but to the extent that it's not followed, then I think it's an enforcement laxity. So when I was putting down that, I actually was looking at the point of enforcement of the code of conduct and strengthening it wherever there are weak links that create escape routes for those who want to violate the code of conduct.
So, in other words, your wording should be to put mechanism in order to enforce that
enhance
code of conduct which is already existing.
Yes.
So you are, otherwise, happy with the full schedule on what is already written there. What is lacking, if we may take it, is the enforcement mechanism.
Yes.
Thank you. My next question. While at CKRC, right, you indicated in an application that your experience accorded you the opportunity to serve in the two committees of finance and revenue, mobilization and outreach. Am I right?
Yes, yes, sir.
This is a wonderful thing, and I think you are, in view of, I'm sure you are well learned, and I can see from your experience that you keep on learning, and you are on top of things. In view of the financial constraints which the IEBC might be facing, because we've been reading all over and over that financing, funding and all that is very, very vital. Now, with this experience which you have, how could you, if appointed a commissioner, how would you help IBC overcome these monumental problems they've been having on financing and funding?
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. I think we had, during my membership in the Committee for Finance and Resource Mobilization, I had numerous opportunities to sit with the donor communities, particularly the UN agencies and embassies of different countries, with a view to soliciting for their support. And many of them supported largely in kind, in terms of preparing materials for civic education and in terms of supporting particular initiatives within the basket of issues that the Commission had. I think with my, I believe with my good public relation and my contacts with those, with my previous contacts, I think I am in a position to identify different entities in the global community that have interest in election matters or certain elements in the election process, because election is not just an event, it's a process which starts the end of one election cycle until you get to the final event of casting the votes. And I think different people would be interested, different entities and different agencies would be interested to take different elements within the basket. The first issue would be to identify what requires to be supported, and then give that menu to the embassies and the UN agencies that have interest in election matters, and see what they pick and proceed with that and go to the next with the balance of what remains in the menu. That would be my approach, and ensure that usually donor community are very keen on how their taxpayers' money is used, because what they're also using is not money from anywhere, it's from taxpayers somewhere. And you just need very high level of transparency, very high level of accountability, very high level of ensuring that the donor is persuaded that indeed the money has been put to best use, so that they can give you more next time. But if you do not become accountable as required, if you do not involve them, for instance, in even conducting monitoring evaluation of the processes that were used to undertake using their money, then they may realize that you are creating a certain level of opaqueness that protects the use of that money. So I think the key would be accountability and transparency of what is obtained, and ensuring that these entities and agencies are approached with options of what they can decide to support. So that would be my approach, Dr.
Thank you, Dr. Abdul Zak. Now, I think we are all aware of what's been floating around in the middle, in the social media everywhere, locally and internationally, of the reputation of IEBC, to the extent that it was an open secret that the election in Kenya costed $8 to $12 a head, where in US it costed $1 per head, and maybe Rwanda about $1 a head. So how would you justify the transparency on this to the donors' aids? Because you as an individual, we do appreciate you have a credibility. What about the system? How would you convince the donors to that effect? And what other challenges you may face in order to convince the donors?
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. Personally, I believe that IEBC has not been sufficiently transparent on how they use the funds, and $80 per vote is exorbitant. If, for instance, there are comparative figures that are way below the figure that our election costs, one of the things the Commission should do is to learn from those entities. How do they do it? And I think our way of conducting elections are such that it is concentrated during the voting process, during the nominations and voting, as opposed to ensuring that most of the things that need to be done are done during the process rather than culminating into the event. Namely, issues of civic education and ensuring that people have their civic rights clearly identified and known to them, and that choices create 5 years of contract with the leaders and so on, should be a continuous process. Civic education being waited until the year to the election or during the election year does not give sufficient time, and therefore create a rush to spend money on matters that would have been progressively done. There are offices right at the constituency level of IEBC. What is their work? The issue of civic education should be a continuous process undertaken by the permanent staff that are based in the constituency, so that it's not costed as a separate item, as if it is just the election time that people should know their rights. Civic rights have to be known throughout, and people should be able to know what they're going to do during that period or during a by-election and so on. So I believe that with the structure IEBC has, it can cut down to its cost substantially, because it has to use its networks. It has the county coordinators, it has constituency coordinators, it has a staff at all these levels, whose functions appear to be appear to be seen during electioneering and during events like it was, voter registration period of a particular window of 1 month or something. These people should be feasible. These people should be given logistics to be able to move around throughout, so that you do not have to hire civic education personnel to go and bombard with a lot of information on the people for a limited period which does not last. But I believe when civic education on elections and civic rights are conducted continuously, people will be better prepared to elect the leaders with the qualities that are within the civic education manual. They will be looking for talents and qualities that are specified by IEBC, and they will be looking for more transparent and accountable leaders.
Thank you, Dr. Mashallah, from your document, we realize that you are very good at research work, and you've done a lot of work for Kakamega, forest rainfall, and all these things. Now, do you feel that in this area of your expertism, you are able to correct what has not been done right at the IEBC, and how?
Thank you, sir. I think I would bring to IEBC an independent, free of any baggage, and transparent and accountable membership. And I believe with my commitment to a better Kenya, with my commitment to ensure that our elections do not become a Waterloo. In every election we have problems of transparency and arguments of what we call bungled elections and so on. I think we need elections that are devoid of ethnicity. We need elections that do not culminate in a situation where people believe it's a matter of death and life for one of their own to be at the top. The reason, in my own assessment, the major reason why we have to strive to ensure one of our tribesmen becomes the leader of the country is because the rest of us feel excluded in terms of the national discourse during the tenure of somebody else, leadership. This has to come to an end, in my opinion. Anybody coming, and we can make the position of the presidency, for instance, less attractive by ensuring that people are served equally and people are made to believe that they're being served equally. And one of the ways of doing that is ensuring that budgetary allocations are done in a fair way. If, for instance, people see the budget is transparent and regions are being allocated budgets based on their need as opposed to based on the expediency of who controls the budget, then there will be less strive to take the leadership of this country and will not be seeing elections as a matter of death and life. The second thing is, I look forward to a day when Mohammed can contest in Kakamega and Chebukati can contest in Garissa and be elected. You know, that day when Mugo and Mwangi can compete in Kisumu and Onyango can be elected in Nyeri. This can actually be realized if we build nationhood. I believe we are a country of nationalities and we failed to build the concept of nationhood into our discourse. We need to build our discourse of nationhood so that we identify ourselves as a nation, and so that we do not identify each other as nationalities belonging to certain blocks and certain groups and certain regions.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abdallah. I'll now request Mr. Gideon Solonka to ask you some questions.
Thank you, Dr. Arale.
Thank you, sir.
Now, again, in your CV, an application for this job of member of IEBC, your concluding remarks were that in the spirit of according equal opportunities to all Kenyans, including those from marginalized areas like myself, referring to yourself, I look forward to your positive consideration. Now, what is your understanding of this term marginalized? Number two, are you able to distinguish between minorities and marginalized groups as provided under Article 56 of the Constitution, and what you are referring as marginalized areas? Maybe we need that clarification in order for us to know whether this is a consideration that should be taken regarding your being here today.
Thank you so much, Mr. Solonka. Yes, indeed, I made that statement. My understanding of marginalized refers to areas and, of course, people therein who remain on the periphery of the national development, who are left behind. There are areas of this country to date that do not have 1 kilometer of tarmac road. Okay? There are areas of this country today where women carry water on their backs for 15, 20 kilometers. These are the areas that I refer to marginalized. And the people in those areas are the people I consider marginalized people. With regard to minorities under Article 56 of the Constitution, those are people whose only and major constraint is numbers. They may not be able to compete in a political plurality where the one with the highest number of voters becomes a leader because of their numbers. You know, these are the people that are constrained by their numbers to compete on equal footing. The Ndorobo, for instance, the El Molo, the Wata, the Munyayaya, the Malakote. Those are people whose numbers may be 1,000 or less, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. So these are people under Article 56 whose major constraint is numbers. With the marginalized group, their major constraint is deprivation. The fact that somebody somewhere felt that they shouldn't be developed. Okay? They were not allocated resources. They are left to their own, destiny to survive. So they have a relationship because both end up being deprived, okay, and that's why the Constitution takes them together sometimes. But they are distinct to the extent that the marginalized may have the numbers. They elect their own, but they still remain on the periphery of the national development.
Thank you, Mr. Arale. So, in your case, do you consider Garissa County to be a marginalized area, even with devolution?
Well, still yes, to a large extent. Devolution has attempted to address some of the problems, but there's major issues of development still will remain with the national government. Issues of roads connecting towns, for instance. The first, Garissa is the provincial headquarter, what was then provincial headquarter of Northeastern Province. And the first road of 150 kilometers has just been completed, Garissa to Modogashi. But the rest of the county, right from Ijara to the Somalia border in Liboi, to the border with Wajir, are still on sand roads, not even Maram. Those are roads that are, well, it's open, but it was those roads that were created by USAID during the 70s. And those are the roads that are still being used. So to that extent, it's still marginalized. What the devolution has done is to attempt to give resources that can be used locally. And devolution has had more than its fair share of problems because of teething problems, because of shocks that were brought in by sudden huge amount of funds that came to people who did not even know how to handle them, and they created problems of ensuring that those elected to positions treat that money as if it's a private money, as opposed to money for the public. So with the teething problems of devolution, maybe 20, 50, 30 years into devolution, that problem might be redressed. But as it is today, I think it still persists.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next question. There is public perception that those who vote decide nothing.
Sorry?
Those who vote decide nothing. But those who count the vote decide everything. You must have heard that.
Yes, I did.
Quote that is attributed to Joseph Stalin. Now, how will you build and ensure that Kenyans have confidence with IEBC should you become commissioner?
Thank you, sir. I think the entire issue of mistrust and lack of faith in the electoral process has a lot to do with historical problem in our country. We realize that until 92, when the advent of multi-party politics, we had the DCs conducting elections, and therefore the president would decide who gets elected. And that, I think, reached its climax in the 1982 infamous Mlolongo, where queues were disbanded and you could not verify what was done. And 92, still the election board was appointed by the president, who was a candidate. Until 97, when IPPG brought in additional 10 commissioners to try to dilute the 12 commissioners that were appointed by the president. But now with the new constitution and with independent entity called IEBC, it is an opportunity it was an opportunity to build trust and transparency among Kenyans. And as I said earlier, one of the ways of ensuring that the event that culminates in casting votes has sufficient trust, the process leading to that should be made transparent enough. People should be involved. And IEBC should conduct the civic education as a continuous process to ensure that the civic rights and the people's knowledge on voting is enhanced, so that people know when they cast their vote for a particular person, they are casting a vote for their future for 5 years, and they are casting a vote knowing that such a person will hold their representation for this period. They are delegating their rights to somebody over a period of 5 years. So I think it is the process that culminates into the election that needs to be made more transparent. But in addition, the election process, the election event itself should be made transparent enough also. There must be mechanisms to ensure that candidates have their agents, the agents are respected, they are well vetted, and the results now being declared by the presiding officer are the same results that are reflected in the tallying center at the constituency level or at the tallying center at the national level. When these are linked and they are traceable with sufficient transparency, I think people would have faith in voting.
Is it your case and position that those things do not exist now?
Well, they do, but to the extent that people still don't have trust in them, then there's something lacking. There's a gap. If there's no gap, people would cast their vote, and they would be confident that their vote would count. So if people still believe that they still have doubts on the quality of their vote, then it means there's something that's not done, and it needs to be done correctly.
Enough. Now, integrity of the voter register is a critical component of free and fair elections. What measures will you propose to be put in place immediately upon you are appointed to enhance the reliability of the register as we go into the next general election?
Thank you, sir. Voter register indeed is critical, because if we have 20 million registered voters and we end up having 21 million voting, then the process credibility is already thrown into disarray. So our voter turnout being known, although it varies from region to region, but on average of between 60 and 70%, then you know exactly what you ought to expect. Voter registers should be collated, the one kept at the constituency level and the one kept at the county level, and the one kept at the national level as a grand register must tally, so that any death level is reflected and addressed, so that the link, and it's through technology, this can be done through technology, appropriate technology that connects the constituency, county, and the national voter registers would eliminate ghost voters, it would eliminate dead voters, and it would eliminate double voting, so that at the click of your finger, the biometric that was used last time, maybe it was because it was the first time being used, we had experienced problems. But if that is properly dealt with, the biometric will eliminate anybody who will have voted at whichever level, so that there's no issue of duplicate voting or people voting with ID cards of dead voters. So I believe that technology, through the use of technology, the issues of credibility of the voter register can be enhanced.
Now, regarding usage of technology, what is your comment? Taking into account that during the last election, one of the main arguments in the Supreme Court was that there was deliberate manipulation of the electronic results transmission system. So, what is your comment on this?
Sir, you know, technology is as good as the user. So if the user is not transparent and credible, the technology would fall by the wayside. So those handling technology must be people above reproach. You can only manipulate the technology through the use of the handlers. Technology does not manipulate itself. So you need people beyond reproach, people of extremely high standing, people who care for their country, people who have passionate nationalism, the people who are not myopic in terms of the continuity of this state called Republic of Kenya, to handle the technology. So IEBC must go beyond its call of duty to ensure that the people who have access to its technology are people who they can vouch for beyond reproach and people who care for this country. Because if you give technology in the hands of people who can be bought with a couple of shillings or who can be manipulated to favor a particular kinsman, then you still, you may as well not have that technology.
Now, lastly, according to campaign spending limits set in 2016, if you recall, political parties could receive at that time up to 15.03 billion in contributions, with a single source limited to 3 billion. Okay?
Yeah.
Presidential candidates were limited to spending 5.25 billion. Those contesting governor, senator, women were allowed up to 433 million. Aspiring MPs up to 33.4 million. MCAs up to 10.3 million. Of course, you remember that those figures were never implemented because MP suspended operation of that act in 2017. Now, what proposals will you as a commissioner give to ensure that elective seats do not become a preserve of the creme de la creme, the best in the society, from the cadre of elitists and senior retired civil servants to the disadvantage of youths, women, persons with disabilities? You will agree with me that some of them may not have such monies to be able to participate in elections. What proposals will you give?
Thank you, sir. I think it's a tragic, story that we've come to a level where we have to buy leadership positions, elected representation, and that's quite unfortunate because elections should be left for people. You sell your agenda and what you do for people and for people to make a choice. But as it is, the suspended law in 2017 is expected to come into force in 2022. But again, you realize that while IEBC is a referee, the players who are the politicians still hold the control. And it will not be surprising if they suspend the enforcement of that act again, because they have direct interest in the implementation of that act. I think my recommendation would be that act be implemented and enforced to the letter. And the mechanisms that IEBC has proposed of late of ensuring that there are spending committees, that are in charge of either the candidate or his representative in charge of the finances and making returns would at least make a contribution, not eliminate the problem of exorbitant spending, but create certain level of control and reduce the amount. And those found violating that law must be, the Commission must be given sufficient powers to deal with them, and up to and including prosecution, and barring them from ever holding a public office maybe for 20 years or something like that. Because those are the enemies of the Republic. People who buy leadership positions, for me, are enemies of this country. Because when they get in, if you have spent 400 million to be elected as a governor, what that exactly means that you're going to recover that money from the public funds that are entrusted with you. If you are a member of parliament, you will loot the CDF funds because you don't have access to any other money to recover your money. And if we let this go, some of them will be going to the banks and putting the expected elections as their collateral, because they know they'll rip back the money. And so it is a situation that is dire, and a situation that requires the support of all Kenyans for IEBC to enforce it. And IEBC should be given teeth, in my opinion, to ensure that violators are prosecuted, and the courts should come and help in enforcement of these provisions.
Thank you, Mr. Nuno.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Solonka. I'll now request Madam Elizabeth Mayo to ask her questions.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Nuno.
Yes, Madam.
I'd like to refer you to the study you did on 30th June.
Okay.
One of the responses you gave to the issue of stakeholder engagement, which ideally you rightfully identified as a challenge, was that the Commission should develop policy guidelines to ensure that stakeholders are appropriately involved in the Commission's calendar of events, particularly leading to the general election. I'm right?
Yes, Madam.
Yeah, so for you to, if you are appointed commissioner after this process, how would you handle this issue by coming up with a policy document that will ensure that stakeholders are appropriately engaged during the election?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Given the opportunity, I would start with by engaging the stakeholders before developing the guidelines, to solicit for their input into the expected guidelines, and tell them, we want to develop guidelines to make you participate and be part of the process of the Commission's calendar of events. What part would you like to play? How would you like to be consulted? And what do you think need to be done in terms of these consultations? And after doing that, then go back and develop the guidelines, and then go back to these stakeholders for validation of those guidelines, and ensure that the guidelines themselves are first acceptable to your stakeholders. Because if you develop guidelines devoid of the stakeholder input, it might turn out that you might be talking to yourself. So to avoid that, I would have a participatory guideline developed so that ownership is inculcated into these stakeholders, and that would then enhance compliance, and the stakeholders would play their appropriate role in the Commission's calendar.
Thank you, Dr. Nuno. Before you engage these stakeholders, I believe that you'd like to identify them first.
Correct.
Such that you engage the people you know.
Correct.
Yeah, kindly tell us some of your key stakeholders you will engage in this process.
First of all, the key stakeholder is the people of Kenya in their diversity and in their various manifestations. Here I mean the public, the actual, not the leaders, but the Kenyan voter who is at the grassroots. And I would do that through the constituency offices and the county offices of the Commission to convene that to the women groups, the CBOs, and so on at the grassroots level. And the self-help groups and so on, the identifiable groups at the grassroots level who represent various households. The other stakeholder are the leaders. And here, the leaders could be community leaders as well as the political leaders. The community leaders would include the elders, the religious leaders, and so on. People considered as shapers of opinion at at the level of the community. The third group would be the government officials at the grassroots level, the chiefs, the sub-chiefs, and their membership within the areas that they deal with. The fourth would be the elected leaders, at the ward level, at the constituency level, at the county level. Those are the leaders who seek elections. Those are the leaders who've been either elected or nominated, and they would be the key contenders in terms of seeking support of these people. And once the Kenyan people as the first level of stakeholder is dealt with, the second level of stakeholder would be the supporters of the commission, the donor community and the friends of the commission, if you like. Be they embassies and UN agencies, or be they regional groupings, regional blocks that you think we believe that would have an interest in the commission. The EAC, for instance, the IGAD, and so on. These are stakeholders at the level of friends of the commission. This would be the key stakeholders for me. The other stakeholders would be people that or institutions that the commission shares relationships with, in terms of in terms of having their processes either checked or validated, or their budgets passed. And these are the government entities, the Parliament, the Senate, the Auditor General, and all these other entities that are of the national entities that the Commission must of necessity interact with. And of course the appropriate ministries that have also a bearing on the Commission's work come to bear at that point. So these are all the stakeholders, and I would disaggregate them and deal with each category at its level and seek its opinion and input at that level. And at the level of validation also, take back the document. After all, the Commission wouldn't incur much additional costs because of it has already representation at the constituency level and at the county level. So the officials there would do the necessary engagement and necessary validation visits later on.
Okay, thank you. So you agree with me that stakeholder management is very, very critical and should be on top of IEBC's agenda?
I do so, Madam.
Yes, if you are appointed today and you are in charge of stakeholder management, I believe all those stakeholders you have identified have got divergent expectations to be met. How will you deal with a case where you are having two opposing sides and they all want attention from IEBC on a particular issue?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I believe that I have a very high level of PR. I believe in consultative and mutually respectful disagreements. So the moment people believe that the ideas have been taken on board, but a particular point that is sticking has less weight than advanced by others, there will be a compromise. So I would have a roundtable discussion with those dissenting or divergent views, stakeholders, with a view to bring them into a common understanding. Common understanding may be one of their views, or it may be a compromise between the two divergent views, for instance.
Okay, thank you. So, after you have identified your stakeholders, I believe that you will be focusing on how to carry out voter education. Yeah?
True.
Because the electorate must be aware of the electoral process.
Correct.
Yeah? So, how are you going to effectively do this such that IEBC ensures that voter education goes down up to the person on the ground?
Very good question, Madam Mayor. Thank you. I think I talked about an election process, which basically, for me, starts from the closure of an election event until the next election event. So civic education, voter education, and IEBC, I saw in my reading that has already a voter education manual, which needs also to be made contemporary, and which needs probably renewal. But throughout the process, voter education should be conducted, and it should be conducted using the structures of IEBC at the grassroots level. This, for me, should be the full-time engagement of constituency coordinators and the support staff that they have, rather than doing it as a calendar event over a particular limited period, as it is the case now. Voter education should be continuous, and it should not just wait for election year, and the people should be made to know the consequences of their delegation of their rights to a particular elected person, and the fact that delegating their rights may keep them in completely a situation that is unacceptable for over a 5-year period. So civic and it's civic plus voter education. Voter education focuses on how to cast the vote, when to take the vote, and so on. But civic education largely talks about the civic rights of this person. So I think voter education should also carry civic information that the public need to know and the voter needs to know. And this, if I join the commission, I would advocate to ensure that it's a continuous process from day one over the 5-year period, so that people are not visited once or twice, but maybe 20 times over the 5 years, so that this actually goes in completely and sinks in the minds and thinking of the Kenyans at the grassroots level.
Okay, thank you. So do you also think that IEBC should have strategic partnership with other stakeholders to enhance this? And if so, what are the key issues you think IEBC should include in their strategic partnership strategy paper when planning for a better stakeholder engagement that can help with enhancing voter education?
Thank you, madam. Yes, I believe that strategic engagement with different stakeholders is critical, particularly those who support the process financially and materially. And the form of that stakeholder engagement, the strategic engagement with stakeholders, should be identification of the key issues, key areas of quick impact that the Commission identifies. The quick impact issues, for instance, voter education is a quick impact issue, because somebody with knowledge would discharge their mandate better than one who doesn't have the knowledge or information. So civic education would be one of the quick impact issues. The other issue would be the Commission's calendar of events in terms of voter registration, which is also another continuous process. Voter registration is also another area that the Commission will solicit for support from the stakeholders and have strategic engagement with the stakeholders. So ideally, the Commission would prepare what I initially called a menu of activities and go with it in the entire 5-year period, and go with it to the strategic partners and see which partner takes what area, and ensure that that is rolled out in a very transparent manner, so that other people's taxpayers' money is not misused in the name of Commission activities.
Okay, thank you. As you plan for your voter education, if you are given this job, you will be educating various categories of the electorate. You will be looking at the youth, you will be looking at the elderly, you will be looking at the persons with disabilities. If you were to do a plan for the elderly, what will you include in that plan?
Thank you. the plan for the elderly should have elements that come from the elderly themselves. If I have to engage the elderly in voter education, I would have what I referred to earlier on in earlier questions, where each category of stakeholders have been engaged on how they would want to be engaged in the process of the Commission's calendar of events. So the elderly may have certain preferences of how they want to be talked to. They may want, of course, the areas that they can't, you can't, for instance, call the elderly to the constituency headquarters because of the distance and logistics. While other stakeholders may bring themselves, you might want to actually create opportunities for either bringing those particular vulnerable stakeholders, as I may, if you allow me, call them, or actually take the information to them, wherever they are, at the village level. And you probably, I would advocate for having more engagement with these people because of the level of vulnerability. The elderly, the marginalized, and people who have particular disadvantages that cannot participate in the mainstream voter education. You will have to create tailor-made communication to them that requires them to get to know what you are doing. And one of the key components right at the grassroots level would be to conduct that in the vernacular so that they understand. So if you do not have staff of the Commission at that level who understand that vernacular, you will have to recruit somebody and train on the delivery of the voter education manual to this particular category of people in a language they understand and in a manner that they can relate to. For instance, if you are talking to a pastoralist and you use an example of coffee plantation, you are really, you're not communicating because they cannot relate to it. They have never seen it. It's like talking to the coffee plantation owner or the wheat plantation owner somewhere and talking to them about camels. That even the analogy and examples you relate to must be context specific and location specific, and must be things that people can relate to and understand. Because voter education is best conducted in a manner that people can identify what you're saying. And words alone may not explain. There are pictures, there are analogies, there are what do you call illustrations, and all those must be must resonate with your audience.
Okay. Thank you very much for your responses. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll now request the Vice Chair, Mr. Warrior Choka, to ask his questions.
Thank you, Dr. Nuno. Glad to know, looking at your CV, that you are involved in the symposium in 1994, in the Symposium on Development in Northern Kenya. Just let you know that I was part of that, initiating that process.
Thank you.
So I'm glad to know that. Now, Dr. Nuno, what is the place of elections in our young democracy, in the growth and development of our democracy in this country?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I think elections are an opportunity for our people to elect representatives for a particular period and have a contractual obligations with them. In terms of ensuring that people feel included in the governance of the nation, elections are important. When we elect our representatives to various levels of elective positions, we feel represented. Kenyans feel that they have put one of their own there, and therefore so-and-so is the MP, so-and-so is the MCA, so-and-so is their governor, so-and-so is their president, and so on. So to the extent that it gives us the comfort of representation and inclusion into the governance of this country at all the levels, elections are important. However, the conduct of elections must be such that people who are voting have trust in them and confidence in them. One of the things you may ask is, why is our voter turnout very low in many occasions, particularly in by-elections? It's largely a reflection of the level of faith people have in voting. So I think we need to enhance our public trust in our election process, but representation and elections are important to the extent that we feel included in the governance of this country.
Now, let's suppose that you have successfully been appointed as a member of the IEBC Commission, and a situation arises where you have to make a decision on an activity, a particular activity or action that IEBC is supposed to undertake. But in your mind, you know that this activity or action, if taken, would completely go against the ideals of the Commission and the Constitution. Your colleagues on the Commission, the other members, are for it. Most of them are for that decision, that activity taking place. What position would you take, or what stand would you take in such a situation?
Thank you, Mr. Choka. I would try extremely hard to persuade my colleagues to consider the country first before anything else, and put the 50 million Kenyans ahead of the 5 or 6 or 7 of them. And if that completely fails, I'm afraid I think I would just quit. Yeah.
Now, talking of quitting, in relation to the IEBC, now, as you know, 4 commissioners quit the IEBC. We only have 3 left. If you succeed in this interview and you go through the process and you're taken on as a commissioner, you'll be 4 from this process that are supposed to be appointed successful. So if those who are successful to join the commission. Now, those 4 who are appointed, you'll be among, supposedly you're among them, and you find an atmosphere that is not so welcoming from the other 3. They feel like you're coming in to challenge them and many other issues. What would you do? Would you again quit?
No, I think, thank you, Vice Chair. In an institution, in every institution, there must be divergent views. But there's a limit to which these divergent views can be accommodated. If they're in violation of the Constitution, those ones cannot be compromised. But being a new commissioner, I'm going in with clean hands and with open mind. And I believe that I will be persuasive enough for people to see my point of view. And I believe the rest of the commissioners who would, if successful, join the commission, being 4, are indeed more than the 3 who are already there. So I believe that, just like myself, if we were to join, my colleagues would also go in with an open mind and clean hands. And we would want an election board that is better, an election board that is responsive to the cries of the Kenyans, an election board that is patriotic and nationalistic enough to put the interest of the 50 million Kenyans before the interest. And therefore, I see a team of 4 new commissioners persuading the other 3 to see their line of thinking. And indeed, instead of being persuaded the other way, they would be actually the ones to lure the entrenched, if you like, if you allow me to use that, the entrenched commissioners who are already there to see their point of view and start on a clean slate.
You talked about the independence of the IEBC, of the Commission, as a key issue. And you mentioned that there are enough safeguards in the Constitution to ensure that this happens, that the Commission is an independent entity. But this has not happened. We've had the Constitution now for more than 10 years, almost. The IEBC is still plagued with a lot of issues to do with interference in its activities from external forces. If you were to join the Commission as a member of the body, what would you do to fight for the integrity and independence of that Commission?
Thank you, Vice Chair. First of all, the issue of independence is best felt at the level of resourcing. If you are not financially independent, your independence will always be pulled down. So I think the weakest link in the independence of IEBC today is the financing, where the holder of the pass dictates how much to give, irrespective of the budget and the activities they have lined up, and that creates a problem for IEBC. I think it's important to enforce the financial independence of IEBC. Secondly, independence of any institution is as good as the independence of the individuals running that institution. So the commissioners must not only be independent, but they must be seen to be independent. Perception is extremely important sometimes, much more than reality. So if commissioners are perceived not to be independent, then the public faith in the process will be reduced, and we'll keep having problems. So I think the IEBC commissioners must come out clearly to change the public perception and create a new perception of independence by not only being independent, but being seen to be independent and behaving in a manner to suggest that they're indeed very independent. If the issue of resources are addressed and the issue of individual personality in the Commission is addressed, then we would have an independent institution that can run its affairs without any reference to anybody, but in the best interest of the Republic of Kenya.
Now, financing, you mentioned financing, which is key to the independence of the institution, of the Commission. Financing is controlled by the executive, largely, despite what the Constitution provides for. Now, the executive is one of those institutions that has been accused of overtly interfering in the affairs of IEBC for various reasons. How would you handle this dilemma?
I think thank you, Vice Chair. Some issues are best addressed outside the purview of the public, rather than being antagonistic and creating a tension, a dichotomy between the executive and the independent institutions. I'm one person who believes in dialogue and behind the scenes lobbying and persuasion. So the Commission, under its leadership, ought to persuade and give clear, convincing arguments that is even in the interest of the executive to have the entity resourced appropriately with a view to conducting elections that are beyond reproach and elections that are transparent and elections whose outcome Kenyans can have confidence in. Because should the country go up in fire, nobody gets saved. Everybody's in it, including those in the executive. So I think I would ensure and advocate for persuasion, lobbying behind the scenes, and persistently persuading the executive to see our point of view.
You have held several leadership positions. In any of these experiences, professional experiences, especially in the various public roles you have played. You said you're in the CKRC Commission and so on and so forth. Have you ever faced a compelling, a highly challenging situation that challenged your leadership skills to the maximum? If you have, tell us about it, that experience, one or two, and what you learned from it, and how the lessons you learned from that situation could be transferred to the Commission.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I think I would just pick one of them. The rest may have been moderate. I started having the first challenge of leadership actually when I was a management trainee in the bank, and I was put as a loans officer in a position that was very precarious. But the one I want to give to the panel is one that I encountered when I was in Addis Ababa, and I was a director for social and environmental affairs, and I had a director general who was from Djibouti, who was my boss, and Interparliamentary Union of IGAD was financed by parliaments, different, the member state parliaments, through already known contributions. And all of them except Somalia, who was exempted because of its state, had certain amount of contribution. And countries were not paying. So the Director General would go, and it became a challenge. So by our second year, because it was new, we were the first team, we did not have finances. And I was tasked to go around member state parliaments. And I was tasked to go to Kenya, Uganda, and Sudan. And this was a big challenge because the argument of the parliament was that we do not see how our previous contribution was used. So I committed to them that indeed the accounts are there and would give them in 2 weeks' time breakdown of what was used on salaries, what was used on travel, what was used on per diem, what was used for rent payment, and so on. And Kenya was the first one to release some money. I think it was 350,000 USD. Then the other parliaments, after the 2 weeks, and we gave them their breakdown, released the money. So this was a challenge. It wasn't my responsibility. I wasn't head of the institution. But I had to step in, one, because my boss was French speaking, and most of these countries were, except Djibouti, were English speaking. So actually, when I came to Kenya and Uganda, we went with him, but in Sudan, I went alone. So I succeeded in a situation which was going to actually culminate or was risking the existence of the institution. And I think 2-3 years after our departure, the institution went under. I'm not sure whether it still exists and in what form it exists, IPU IGAD today, but I haven't heard of it again. And I'm sure it's nothing else but funding. So that was a challenge. So by enhancing transparency, by showing these parliaments where the money went, it was possible to unlock and make them contribute as promised.
As a member of the Commission, would you foresee a situation or circumstances where an election has to be cancelled, or circumstances where you have to advise the Commission to cancel an election? What kind of circumstances would those be that would lead you to advise the Commission to cancel an election somewhere?
Thank you, Vice Chair. Well, I think that's quite a hypothetical situation, but one of the things that can make, first of all, going into elections, if you are definite that the outcome of that election is going to ban the country, it's not worth it, in my opinion. And one of the things that can make that happen is breakdown of the election voting technology, for instance, complete breakdown just on the eve of the elections. Two, could be to complete disruption of the voter register. And I think one of the lessons that we need to learn is to have backup systems in place. For instance, in case of the voter register, there must be a remote recovery site where a parallel vote, what do you call, not a parallel, but a copy voter register is maintained outside of your premises and sometimes outside of your seat of domicile, so that should the worst happen, you have a backup that you can simply pull within seconds. So those are the two scenarios that I would see, and both of them should only be informed by the conviction that our wonderful country is on the verge of collapse if we proceed with these elections.
Finally, Dr. Nuno, do you foresee a day when Kenyans sitting in their homes and wherever would be able to vote on their phone, just like we do M-Pesa and we send hundreds of thousands of shillings? What about just sending a data, a digit somewhere, clicking and sending, saying that you have voted? Do you foresee such a day? And as a commissioner, if you are to become one, how do you contribute to the making such a day happen?
Thank you, Vice Chair. Well, I dream of that day, and I am an optimist. I believe that day will come. The ownership of smartphones, even now as we talk, in the country is so widespread. And I think the only thing we need to do in order to reach there are two things, in my opinion. One, invest heavily in technology. And two, invest in voter education in the use of that technology. And it shouldn't be a month or a year. It has to be a continuous process over a period for people to, and there must be illustration, so that even when you're voting, it's not necessarily you vote for wherever there's a TV, so that you actually see step by step how to use your smartphone to vote. And whoever has no TV will go to where there's TV. We are almost reaching a situation where we are approaching 80–90% power connectivity in the country, except for areas that I still consider peripheral and marginal. So the day when our power connectivity will be 100%, and the day when our infrastructure in terms of technology is widespread, we will be able to get there. And being an optimist, I think it's not far-fetched.
Good to end on an optimistic note. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Over to you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Now I'll request Reverend Father Mutie to ask his questions.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Nuno, I would wish to ask you just a few questions.
Okay, sir.
I'll begin by looking at your application, which you did on the 12th of May. You say that you had, as a commissioner of CKRC, you had an opportunity to traverse our great nation and saw for yourself the rich diversity of this nation, both in terms of communities, as well as natural resource distribution and geographical features. You went ahead and said you got the first-hand account of the level of economic and development disparities prevailing in our country. Just to get to hear from you, does this inform your motivation for the application of this job, or do you have any other motivation?
Thank you, Father. I think, yes, that's indeed my statement. IEBC is not a development commission, so it wouldn't address development disparities as I observed, and it's not demotivation as such, but it will be useful to the extent that an electoral process is being designed and the opportunity to vote is being given to everybody, irrespective of where they are and how accessible or inaccessible they are. So I brought that in to reflect that notwithstanding, everyone has a right to vote and everyone is entitled to representation. So for me, that background information would help me, if I was accorded this opportunity, to ensure that designing the electoral process, designing the voter education process, and rolling out processes of engagement with stakeholders is not curtailed and is not devoid of the inclusion of those who are in the periphery and those who are in far-fetched and inaccessible areas. So that was the point at which I included that, but well understanding that IEBC is not a development agency and it cannot correct an imbalances that are responsibilities of development agencies.
So what was your motivation, sir?
My motivation, Father Mutie, was to ensure that I bring clean hands and open mind. I do not see our election processes going well, in my own opinion. And I believe that we require the minds of people who are impartial, who cannot be persuaded and swayed by selfish individual interest, who have no political inclination of one wing or the other, who can then bring in that mindset to the commission and its dispensation so that we have a better Kenya. I'm a person who believes in leaving a place better than I found it. I find a space where I can make a contribution in IEBC today.
Thank you, sir. Allow me also to interact with your CV. And in your CV, you say that while you were in the commission, I remind you of CKRC Commission. You said while in the commission, you've consistently been a strong voice in favor of the marginalized groups. And here you insisted on, being a strong voice for the marginalized, which is also despite devolution. Does it mean that you have an agenda if you become a commission?
Thank you, sir. No, I don't have an agenda, but I'm a person who believes in fairness and equity. That cannot be isolated from me. I was born like that. And I believe everybody, every single person among the 50 million Kenyans has a right to representation and has a right to development. So having been a strong voice was because I felt in the commission the voice of these categories of people was not coming out clearly. And when many of my colleagues avoided conducting civic education in the areas that were considered difficult and challenging, I took up that task myself. And for 60 days plus, including the month of Ramadan when we were fasting, I conducted civic education from Mandera through Marsabit all the way Moyale, from Isiolo through Marsabit and all that corner. And I went to collect views from areas that were equally challenging in the rest of Kenya. When I went to Elgeyo Marakwet, what is Elgeyo Marakwet County today, to collect views in a classroom, and in a school where people had to be, were expected to come on their own, I ensured that people were actually, those who were unable to come because of distances, were ferried and paid for. through the support of the Commission Secretariat, of course. So I'm one person who's been born like that. I believe in fairness and equity without disenfranchising anybody and without marginalizing anybody. But it has nothing to do with having a mindset that I would favor these people so that they get advantage of others. No, but I believe in them getting the fair share of representation and attention as any other part of the country. And so I believe those in the other parts of the country equally expect fairness and equity from the Commission. So my basic bottom line principle is fairness and equity wherever I serve, and that has been my principle throughout.
Thank you, sir. Allow me to ask you another question. In your interactions and work, do you have a track record of fighting corruption? And if so, share with us an experience or two.
Well, thank you, Father. I wouldn't point out a situation beyond generality of advocating for transparency of records and ensuring that an accountability is on the table. Where, for instance, when I was in the CKRC, as a member of the Finance Committee, we would receive the report of the Secretariat periodically and ensure that the monies received and the monies spent are all accounted for. When I was in IGAD, I was responsible for a directorate, and the directorate had its own resources, and that also, at that level, I ensured that there was accountable and transparent mechanism. Beyond that, I don't have a situation where I confronted a corrupt practice to the extent that I can attribute myself solely as the person who corrected it.
Thank you. Dr. Suppose you were a commissioner of IEBC and a staffer or a staff brought to you evidence that appears credible, showing that your fellow commissioner or commissioners attempted to influence the award of a tender. What would you do?
Thank you, Father. I think it is important to appreciate the fact that social diversity is everywhere, and where more than one person meets, while one is solely responsible for one's integrity and conduct, you may not be able to persuade the hearts of others to see exactly what they're doing. But should that kind of event arise, one of the first things I would do is to confront the colleague and ask them to hear their part of the story. This is what has been alleged. I will not disclose my source, and it's inappropriate. Our terms of reference and the terms of reference of independent commissioner does not allow that. And if that fellow declines or denies, or I am not persuaded that I have made an impact sufficient enough to deter, or even if that was accepted, liability accepted, and said, I'm sorry, I did that, but I will not do it again, I would still bring it to the commission without naming names. And we've done that before, I think, at the level of generalities, as I said before, where we caution each other at the commission level and say, it appears, or it has been reported that are interfering with the Secretariat process of doing their work by interfering with the tender awards. This is unacceptable, and this is that's going to be a situation for removal of a commissioner should that continue. So please ensure that you desist from that, and that should never be had again. So for me, the approach would be first the colleague, because it might be misunderstanding, and maybe a suggestion made by this colleague may have been construed to be an interference. But even that, as I said earlier, Father Mutia, perception is more important than reality. If a commissioner is perceived to be influencing, that is what needs to be corrected, even if the intention was not to interfere. So I would try to do that perception level, but if, irrespective of the outcome of that, I would still ensure that this will recur. And it's not, I think, too theoretical. This is a very common thing. It happens sometimes with the board members where I sit, and we just raise at the board level and say, look, some of us, and sometimes you do it collectively, say some of us are interfering with the management in awarding tenders. This is not our call of duty. You know, get out of that. And if you want to continue doing that, get out of the board. So that happens at the level of collectivity, and I would take that approach personally.
Thank you, Dr. Nunu. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Reverend Father. Dr. Nunu, we've now come to the end of your oral interview. Maybe I can give you an opportunity to ask a question or make a comment.
Thank you, Dr. Chair. Thank you. I think I would just make one comment and maybe one question. The comment is to appreciate the opportunity you've given me. I think I'm leaving this hall a better person than I came in through your interaction, through your interrogations. I appreciate the opportunity. Again, as I said at the beginning, I believe that you've given me an opportunity to be heard. And for me, that is a very fair and fair opportunity, one of the things that I hold in very high esteem. My question is, I know these interviews are going on until the 22nd. When would a candidate expect a final decision from the panel?
Thank you so much, Dr. Nuno. After the interviews, we'll be retreating to come up with our recommendations. We'll then send those to His Excellency the President, who would then formally gazette the nominees for this position. So at that point is when you'd actually find out the outcome of the interview.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, do allow me, on behalf of my fellow panelists, as well as on behalf of the Kenyan people, to express our sincere appreciation for you applying to serve Kenya in the capacity of member of IEBC. We don't take it for granted, so we really do appreciate, and we wish you well. So a member of the Secretariat will now escort you as you leave, and please ensure you get your original certificates so that you go with them. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, members.
So we will be reconvening at 2 o'clock to meet with the next candidate. Thank you.
Bwana Motiso, pikipiki yako ndio hii. Uko shoni yangu. Hii pikipiki ni unakumbuka uniekelea the lowest unique bid yako ilikuwa ngapi? 18 shillings. Na unajua kuendesha hii gari? Kidogo. Haya, kitoko yako shika helmet, kifungu yako chomoka na mali yako.
Kujiunga na QuickBid ni rahisi. Enda kwenye M-Pesa, bonyeza paybill kisha weka business number 4032353. Kwenye account weka kodi ya bidhaa unayotaka na bid yako ya chini zaidi. Kwa mfano TV 16. Kisha weka shilingi 20 tu kama idadi yako. Weka bid yako pia kwenye www.quickbid.co.ke. Kumbuka, bid ya chini zaidi ya kipekee ndio hununua. QuickBid, bidhaa bora kwa bei ya chini.
It all began. As the mother of broadcasting in Kenya, you can